Hello guys, welcome to Harryverse X. Today we have an incredible story for you. Ghost Rider was Harry's godfather instead of Sirius, and Spirit of Vengeance hunted every Horcrux. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The motorcycle landed on the outskirts of Godric's Hollow at 11:47 on the night of October 31st, 1981, and the village was already wrong. Johnny Blaze could feel it before he cut the engine. That particular vibration in the air that meant something had torn through the membrane between what should be and what shouldn't. He'd been chasing that feeling for 3 years, ever since James Potter had called him from a payphone in Edinburgh and said, in that voice James used when he was genuinely scared, "Johnny, I need to tell you what's happening over here, and I need you to not freak out." Johnny had freaked out. Considerably. But he'd also listened, because James Potter was one of maybe 4 people on the planet he would have taken a bullet for without thinking twice, and the story James told him, dark wizards, a prophecy, a man who called himself Lord Voldemort and had been systematically murdering anyone who disagreed with him for a decade, that story had lit something cold and certain in Johnny's chest. He knew evil. He'd made a deal with it once, a long time ago, and the thing that lived inside him now knew the difference between a man who did bad things and a thing that had stopped being a man altogether. He'd been in Nevada when the feeling hit him. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Just that internal seismic shift, like something load-bearing had collapsed somewhere in the architecture of the world, and Johnny Blaze sat up in his motel room at 9 in the evening, looked at the water stain on the ceiling, and said, "James." He was on the bike in 4 minutes. The Spirit didn't need roads to cross the Atlantic, not when Johnny let it have the reins properly. The motorcycle left a burning streak across the sky that anyone looking up would have rationalized as a meteor, and Johnny held on and didn't think about what he might find when he got there, because if he thought about it, the Spirit would feel it, and then there would be nothing coherent left of Johnny Blaze to land the bike. Godric's Hollow smelled like burning and old magic and something else, something the rider recognized instantly and hated with a depth that had no bottom. It smelled like death that had been cheated. Not the clean death, the natural death, the kind the rider escorted through the door without ceremony or cruelty. This was the other kind. The kind that tore at the fabric, that left hooks in the world, that said "I refuse" with such violent insistence that the universe itself bore the scar. He killed the engine on the main street. His boots hit cobblestone and he stood there for a moment in the dark, letting the rider look through his eyes at what was left of Godric's Hollow. The village was quiet in that specific way that meant everyone had decided, collectively, to pretend they hadn't heard anything. Curtains were still. Lights were mostly out. The pub at the corner had its sign swinging in a wind that wasn't there. At the end of the lane, one house was rubble. Johnny walked toward it. He didn't run. The thing he was afraid of finding was already found, already certain. He could feel the absence of James the way you feel the absence of a sound you'd stopped noticing until it stopped. Like tinnitus going silent. A negative space in the shape of a person. The house had been blown outward from the upper floor. The ground floor was mostly intact. He could see the sitting room through the collapsed front wall, a sofa still upright and absurdly domestic, a child's toy on the floor, a mug of something on the coffee table that had never been drunk. The stairs were half standing. The roof was gone on the east side, open to the cold November sky. He found James in the entry hall. He was face down, his wand 3 feet from his hand, and he hadn't had time to use it. Johnny stood over him for a long moment. He was aware of the rider pressing against the inside of his skin, not with fury, not yet, but with something more patient and more terrible, the way a forest fire is patient when the wind drops. He crouched and put his hand on James's shoulder and just stayed there. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that James could hear, and Johnny had never been the type to perform grief for an audience that wasn't there. "I've got him," he said finally, quietly. "Whatever that means. I've got him." He stood and went up the stairs. Lily was in the nursery doorway. She'd run toward whatever was coming, that was obvious. She was facing the room, not away from it, which told him everything he needed to know about Lily Evans Potter and nothing that surprised him. He didn't linger. The room itself was destroyed, the crib demolished, the wall behind it blown to rubble with the night sky visible through it, cold stars indifferent overhead. In the wreckage, something was crying. He found the crib's occupant in the corner, sitting in a pile of plaster dust and splinters, crying with the focused dedication of a child who has been crying for some time and intends to continue. The baby was maybe 15 months old. Dark hair, James's disaster of a hairstyle already establishing itself. A cut on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt, still bleeding sluggishly, and Johnny hissed through his teeth at the sight of it because that was not a normal wound. That was a mark. The kind of mark that meant something passed through here and left a piece of itself behind. He crouched down. The baby, Harry, James had named him Harry, and the name hit Johnny in the sternum as if it had weight, looked up at him with enormous green eyes. Lily's eyes, impossibly green, tear-streaked and red-rimmed but fixed on Johnny with an alertness that was startling in a child that age. The baby stopped crying. "Hey," Johnny said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Hey, I've got you." He reached out and the baby grabbed his finger with both hands and held on with the grip strength that all babies mysteriously possess, and Johnny Blaze, who had ridden burning through the sky across an ocean, sat down in the wreckage of the nursery and felt something in his chest that the spirit of vengeance had no category for. Then the writer felt the other thing. It came on slowly, the way the writer usually communicated, not in words but in impressions, like heat signatures, like the smell of something off. Johnny went still and let it wash over him, and what the writer showed him was this: the child in his arms was carrying something that should not be alive. A fragment. A shard of something broken deliberately, broken with ritual and murder, torn from a larger darkness and lodged here, in this baby, in this wound, burning cold in the center of a child's head like a coal buried in snow. Johnny knew what it was. He'd seen one before, once, in the possession of a warlock in Budapest who'd been stupid enough to try and explain the concept to him. A Horcrux. The absolute worst thing a human being could do with a human soul, according to the writer's understanding of the natural order, which was the only understanding of the natural order that mattered. You died when you died. That was the deal. The writer existed, in part, to enforce that deal on the people who thought they were clever enough to wriggle out of it. The warlock in Budapest had not finished his explanation. But this was different. This was not a willing vessel. This was a child, and the fragment was lodged in him like a piece of shrapnel, not invited, not welcomed, buried there by the force of a killing curse that had bounced back on its caster. The man who'd called himself Lord Voldemort had tried to kill this baby and the curse had hit the child's mother's protection, some magic so old and so specific that even the writer recognized it with something like respect, and redirected, and in redirecting it had torn a piece of Voldemort's soul free and lodged it in the only other living thing in the room. The fragment was not the child. But it was in the child. And the writer could not burn it out without burning the child too. Johnny Blaze looked down at Harry Potter, who was looking back at him with Lily's eyes and James's hair and a piece of a monster's soul lodged in his forehead, and the decision was made in a moment that lasted approximately forever and approximately no time at all. "All right," he said. "You're coming with me." He'd been standing up, the baby held against his chest, when he heard the crack of someone operating at the lane's end, and turned to find Albus Dumbledore picking his way through the rubble of the front wall with his wand out and his expression doing something complicated. Dumbledore was a tall man with silver hair and half-moon glasses and a kind of presence that filled the space around him the way a fire fills a room, warming from a distance, uncomfortably hot up close. Johnny had never met him in person, but James had described him, and James's descriptions of people were always accurate even when they were uncharitable. "He's the most powerful wizard alive," James had said, "and he knows it, and most of the time he's on the right side of things, but you always feel like you're being managed. Like you're a piece on a board that he hasn't moved yet but he's already decided where you're going." Dumbledore stopped when he saw Johnny. His eyes, which were very blue and very sharp, moved from Johnny to the baby and back again with the efficiency of someone filing things into categories. "You must be John Blaze," he said. His voice was mild, the way deep water is mild on the surface. Johnny said. And you're Dumbledore. I am. Dumbledore looked at Harry, at the wound on his forehead, at the way Harry had his face pressed against Johnny's jacket and had stopped crying. He appears to be unharmed. Remarkably so. He took a step forward. I'll take him from here. I have arrangements in place for, no. The word came out flat and final, and the rider put weight behind it that made the air temperature drop 2 degrees. Dumbledore stopped. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, recalibrated. Mr. Blaise, he said carefully. I understand you were James's friend. I'm deeply sorry for what happened tonight. But Harry needs to be placed somewhere safe, with family who, his mother's sister, Johnny said. Petunia Dursley. Privet Drive. Dumbledore's eyebrows moved slightly. James mentioned her, Johnny said. Once. He said Lily cried after every phone call. He said Lily's sister told her she was a freak, and meant it. You're going to put this child in that house. The blood protection, I know about the blood protection. He didn't, entirely, but the rider did, and the rider was telling him that the protection was real, but that real protection and good protection were not always the same category of thing. You're going to put him somewhere the magic keeps him safe and the people make him miserable, and you're going to call that a plan. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The night wind moved through the ruined house. Somewhere in the village, an owl called. He is the subject of a prophecy, Dumbledore said. One that I cannot share fully yet, but which indicates that Harry must be the one to face Voldemort. He needs to be raised in the wizarding world, or adjacent to it, or at least, he needs to be alive, Johnny said. And he needs to be whole. Those are the first 2 items on the list, and everything else comes after. Mr. Blaise, I was his godfather before tonight, Johnny said. James asked me. I said yes. That means something. You know it means something. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. It was the look of a man used to winning arguments by outlasting them, by allowing silence to do the work that words had failed to do. Johnny was immune to it. He'd stared into the abyss of his own damnation before he was 20 and learned that silence didn't bluff him. If I allow this, Dumbledore said finally, I will need to know that the boy is safe. That he is protected. That when the time comes, I'll bring him to Hogwarts, Johnny said. I give you my word. But he's mine until then. It was not agreement, exactly. But Dumbledore stepped back, which was the closest thing to agreement a man like that offered when he was choosing to lose gracefully. You understand what he carries, Dumbledore said softly. Not a question. His eyes were on the lightning bolt scar. Yes. And what must eventually be done about it? Johnny met his eyes and said nothing. Dumbledore studied him for another moment, then nodded once, precisely, and operated away with another crack, and the night closed behind him like water over a stone. Johnny looked down at Harry. Harry had one fist wrapped in the leather of his jacket and had apparently decided, based on the available evidence, that going to sleep was the appropriate response to the situation. His eyes were closed. He looked impossibly small and impossibly peaceful for a child who just survived something unsurvivable. All right, Johnny said again. We'll figure it out. He walked out through the wreckage of the front wall, past where James was, and he didn't look back, because looking back wouldn't change anything, and the road was always forward. That was the first lesson the rider had taught him and the truest one. The motorcycle was waiting at the curb. Johnny settled onto it one-handed, Harry held against his chest with the other arm, and thought about logistics for exactly 4 seconds before accepting that logistics were going to be solved as they came up and not before. He'd handled worse. He'd handled considerably worse. He kicked the engine over. The sound was low and deep and it rolled through the quiet village like a rumble of distant thunder, and Harry Potter, inexplicably, slept through all of it. Johnny Blaise rode into the night, and behind him, Godric's Hollow sat in its ruins, and the street was empty, and the stars were very cold and very distant, and the road stretched out ahead into the dark. The thing about raising a baby on the road was that the road had to stop being a metaphor and start being a place where a baby could actually live, and that required compromises. The first year was the hardest. Johnny leased a house in rural Nevada, a single-story place outside Boulder City with a workshop out back and enough land that the occasional hellfire incident didn't bother the neighbors, and he put the bike in the workshop and he learned about formula and diapers and the specific desperate arithmetic of sleep deprivation. He called in every favor owed to him in 3 countries to get Harry proper documentation. Birth certificate, American Social Security number, the works. Harry Blaze, it said on the documents. Officially, legally, paperwork provably. Harry shot him a look of infant skepticism when Johnny explained this, which was probably just gas but which Johnny chose to interpret as philosophical acceptance. The rider was strange around the baby. Not dangerous. Johnny had been terrified of that at first, had spent the first weeks barely sleeping because he kept checking that the rider understood the child was not prey, not a guilty soul, not a target. But the rider didn't need that explained. The rider could feel the shard in Harry the way a wound feels a splinter, and it regarded the baby with something that was probably the closest the spirit of vengeance could get to protectiveness, a constant, banked attention, like a guard dog lying down but not sleeping. The shard could not be burned. Johnny tried, once, in the workshop at 3 a.m. when Harry was asleep in the house and there was no one to see, and he let the rider come out fully and directed that fire at the ambient sense of the Horcrux, and what came back was the rider's equivalent of a headshake. Not yet. Not this way. Not without the child. He sat with that for a long time. It became the central impossible fact of his existence. There was something wrong in this child that he was designed to destroy, and he couldn't destroy it without destroying the child, and that was not happening. So he raised Harry instead. It was not a conventional upbringing. Harry's earliest memories, Johnny would ask him about them, years later, when Harry was old enough to have that conversation, were of workshop smells, of engine grease and metal and the specific good smell of old leather. Of a man with dark eyes and a face that defaulted to Sirius who made surprisingly good pancakes and knew every Johnny Cash album from memory. Of the road, eventually, as Harry grew old enough to ride in the special rigged seat Johnny bolted onto the back of the bike, Harry in a tiny leather jacket and a helmet that was aggressively oversized on his small head. Harry called him Dad. Johnny hadn't asked for that. Hadn't engineered it. One day, around age 3, Harry had simply started using the word and Johnny had decided that the smart play was not to examine it too hard, because the alternative, explaining to a 3-year-old the full biographical detail of what he was and wasn't, was obviously not the move. He would explain it when Harry was old enough, and he did, in pieces, across many years. Your real dad was my best friend, Johnny told him when Harry was 5, sitting in a diner in Flagstaff, eating hash browns with the systematic intensity children bring to foods they love. His name was James. Your mom was Lily. They were really good people, Harry. The best people. And they loved you so much they never even got to show you how much, because someone took that away. Someone took them away. Harry had processed this with the deliberate thoughtfulness of a 5-year-old who has learned that some information requires sitting with. Then he'd looked up and said, "Did you catch the someone?" "Not yet," Johnny said. Harry had nodded, apparently filed this information appropriately, and returned to his hash browns. He was, from the beginning, uncanny. Not in a dramatic way, he didn't levitate things or set accidental fires, or rather he did set accidental fires but they were that kind of fire and they didn't alarm Johnny the way they would have alarmed most guardians. He was perceptive beyond what his age accounted for. He had James's laugh and Lily's tendency to look straight at you when you were being evasive and not look away until you stopped. He picked up motorcycle mechanics by osmosis, watching Johnny work in the shop for hours and then handing him the right tool before Johnny asked for it. He read everything he could get his hands on, which was a habit Johnny encouraged and which eventually required a significant library. Magic manifested clearly when Harry was 7. A boy at school had been cruel to him, had said something about his scar, the lightning bolt visible on his forehead, had called it ugly and called Harry a freak, and Johnny had come to pick him up from school that afternoon to find Harry standing in the playground with his fists clenched and the boy who'd said it sitting on the ground 20 feet away with his eyebrows singed off, looking extremely surprised. Johnny crouched down to Harry's level. Harry was braced for trouble. "What did he say?" Johnny asked. Harry told him. "Did you mean to do that?" "No," Harry said. Then, more honestly, "Maybe a little." "Okay," Johnny said. He stood up. "Get in the truck." He'd had the conversation with Harry about his nature, both natures, actually, over the next year. The wizarding world first, because that was the one Harry had directly manifested, and then the other thing. The rider. What it was, what it meant, why the bike sometimes left burning tire tracks when Johnny was angry and why Johnny's eyes went orange in the dark sometimes when he was very tired or very worried. Harry had taken the information about the wizarding world with the specific excitement of a child who has just had a hypothesis confirmed, and had taken the information about the rider with the focused attention of someone learning a thing they sense will be important later. "So you're a demon?" Harry said. "There's a demon," Johnny said carefully. "I'm the guy it rides in." "Is it bad?" "It punishes bad people." Harry considered this. What's the difference between punishing bad people and being bad? Johnny had looked at him for a long moment across the kitchen table, and he'd thought, James would have loved this kid. "That's the question," he said. "That's the whole question. Smart people spend their whole lives on it. What's your answer?" "Intent," Johnny said. "And restraint. What you're trying to do and whether you can stop yourself from going past it. The writer doesn't always get the balance right. I try to keep it honest." Harry had nodded, in that way he had of taking something in and not responding immediately because he was actually thinking about it, not performing thoughtfulness but practicing it. Johnny had thought, watching him, that for a kid who'd been through as much metaphysical inconvenience as Harry Potter, he was remarkably well adjusted. He'd made sure of that deliberately, the way you make sure of an engineering specification. Harry was not going to be a weapon. He was not going to be a victim. He was going to be a person, and whatever came after that was going to come from choices Harry made rather than damage that had been done to him. He told him about his parents when he was 7 and he told him again when he was 9, with more detail, because Harry asked more detailed questions at 9 and deserved better answers. He told him about Voldemort, as much as he knew, which was enough. He told him about the prophecy in general terms. He did not tell him about the Horcrux in his scar, not yet, because there were some loads too heavy for a 9-year-old, and he was still trying to figure out whether there was a solution that the writer wasn't showing him yet. He did tell him about the other Horcruxes. He'd found the first one in the summer of 1982, when Harry was barely 2 and Johnny had left him with his neighbor, a retired woman named Grace who had 4 grandchildren and a talent for pancakes that exceeded even Johnny's, and ridden east. He'd felt the first one from outside London, that same signature, death cheated, something that should not be alive, and tracked it to a village in Yorkshire, to a farmhouse where a family of wizards was living alongside a snake that was not a snake, not entirely, and that watched Johnny come through the front door with human intelligence in reptile eyes. He'd had to wait for the family to leave before he did what needed doing. He wasn't going to burn a family to get to a snake. The snake hadn't burned easily. It had fought with a fury that tasted like the same thing he'd felt in Harry's scar, and when it was finally gone there had been a scream that no one else in the county would have heard because it was in a register beyond sound, and Johnny had stood in the ash of that farmhouse kitchen and thought, 1. He'd felt 3 more, after that, over the years. 2 he hadn't been able to reach yet, 1 was in a vault underground somewhere, warded beyond anything he could get through without bringing the whole city down, and 1 was somewhere overseas in a cold place, also warded, also patient. 1 he hadn't located at all, just felt the ambient edge of, somewhere in Britain. And 1, the 7th, the one that wasn't a Horcrux in the proper sense but was functionally the same, was in Harry's scar, and he visited it every day because it was right there and he still couldn't do anything about it. He'd been working on it for 10 years. The writer was patient. So was Johnny, when he had to be. Harry was 10, almost 11, when the letters started. They'd been back in England for 6 months by then. Johnny had moved them specifically because he'd promised Dumbledore, and because the time was coming and Johnny had learned to trust the writer's sense of timing even when his own timing would have preferred more lead time. They were renting a farmhouse in Wales, which had a workshop and a moor and a local pub where nobody asked questions, and Harry had adapted with his usual equanimity, which was what happened when you raised a child on the road. They became portable in the ways that mattered. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Thick parchment, green ink, a seal with a crest of a badger and a snake and a raven and a lion. It was addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the East Bedroom, Blaze Farmhouse, Carnarvon, Wales, and Johnny had turned it over in his hands twice before setting it on the kitchen table where Harry would find it when he came down for breakfast. Harry had come downstairs, looked at the letter, looked at Johnny, picked it up, and read it with the same focused calm he brought to everything. When he was done he set it back down. "It's a school letter," he said. "Yeah. Magic school." "Yeah. You knew it was coming." "I knew it was coming." Harry sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, the moor was doing what moors did in October, being grey and horizontal and faintly threatening. The kitchen was warm. The letter sat between them. "The people who killed my parents," Harry said. "They came from there. From that world. Some of them. Yes. And the man who killed them is still out there." "What's left of him?" Johnny said. He's not whole. He's been diminished. But yes, what's left of him is still out there." Harry looked at the letter for another moment. Then he looked at Johnny with those green eyes, Lily's eyes, and said, "Are you coming with me? To the school?" "No. They don't, it's warded. I can't get in there." "Because of the writer?" "Because of the writer." Harry absorbed this. "Then, will you be nearby?" "I will always be nearby," Johnny said. "That's a promise." Harry picked up the letter again. "Okay," he said. "I'll go." He said it not with the excitement of a child discovering a magical world, but with the settled readiness of a person who has been briefed on the campaign and is confirming deployment. Johnny felt that in his chest, not worry, exactly, because he'd done everything he could to prepare Harry for this, but something adjacent to worry. A parent's specific, incurable fear that the world will not be good enough for their child. "One more thing," Johnny said. Harry looked up. "There's something I haven't told you yet," Johnny said. "About your scar." It was not the easiest conversation he'd ever had. He told it straight, no softening, because Harry was Harry and he'd always responded to straight better than to managed. He explained what a Horcrux was and what it meant that one was in Harry's scar and why the writer couldn't simply burn it out. He watched Harry's face while he said it, the stillness, the slight tightening around the eyes, the way his jaw set. When Johnny finished, Harry was quiet for a while. "So I have part of his soul in my head," Harry said finally. "Yes. And you've known since the night you found me." "Yes. And there's no way to remove it without, I don't know yet," Johnny said. "The writer doesn't know yet. But we're working on it. We're working on it every day." Harry was quiet again. Then he looked out the window at the grey moor and said, "I don't feel like there's anything in there. In my head. It doesn't feel like anything. It wouldn't. But it's there. It's there." More silence. Then Harry looked back at him and said, with the kind of equanimity that had always made Johnny simultaneously proud and faintly terrified, "All right. Then I'll go to this school and I'll learn what I need to learn, and you'll figure out the scar, and we'll deal with it when we get there." He picked up the letter. "Does it say anything about a shopping list?" It did. Johnny showed him the supply list and Harry read it with the same focused attention he applied to motorcycle manuals and the kind of long-suffering practicality of someone who has learned that the correct response to impossible situations is to begin with the practical details and work outward. That night, after Harry had gone to bed, Johnny sat in the workshop with the lights off. The motorcycle was in the corner. The bike was never entirely still, it breathed, in its way, pulsed with something that was not an engine cycle, and Johnny sat across from it in the dark and let the rider look out through his eyes at the night. "I know," he said. "I know there are more of them." The rider didn't answer in words. It answered in that sense of banked fire, patient and absolute, and Johnny read what it was telling him the way he'd learned to read it over 15 years. There is one in a house in England with a family of wizards, and it is aware and it is waiting and it is afraid of what is coming because it can feel the others going out one by one and it knows it is next. The locket. He'd located it to a house near Bristol, a pure-blood family named Burke who didn't know what they were sitting on, didn't know that the antique locket in their drawing room was a fragment of the most evil man in living memory. He'd deal with it before Harry went to London. One less thing. He started the bike. The workshop doors opened as if pushed by a wind that came from nowhere. Johnny rode out into the Welsh night and the tire tracks behind him glowed orange and faded slowly, like cooling metal, and the stars above the moor were the same stars that had been above Godric's Hollow in 1981, cold and indifferent, and the road was forward, always forward, and there was work to do. He came back before dawn, smelling of ash and the specific ozone smell that followed the rider's fire, and he washed his hands and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, and when Harry came down in the morning there was a cup of coffee already made for him. Harry had been drinking coffee since he was 9, which was another thing that would have horrified most parents, and which Johnny had decided was probably fine given the context of Harry's general existence, and the supply list from the Hogwarts letter on the table with notes written in the margins in Johnny's handwriting. Harry picked it up and read the notes. "Ollivander's is the wand shop," he read aloud. "Been there since 382 BC, older than most of the magic in Britain, go there first. Gringotts is the bank, run by goblins, don't be rude to the goblins. Your parents left you money, the vault number is 687. The key is on the hook by the back door. Buy what's on the list and whatever else looks useful. Trust your instincts." He looked up. "You wrote me notes." "I've been waiting 10 years to take you shopping," Johnny said. "I wasn't going to be unprepared." Harry looked at the notes again. He was quiet for a moment, and Johnny could see him doing that thing, that internal processing, the filing of things too large for immediate emotional acknowledgement. Then he said, "The locket's gone, isn't it?" Johnny looked at him. "You smell like the rider," Harry said. "You always come home smelling like that when you've been hunting." He met Johnny's eyes and his own were clear and certain. "One of the pieces. The locket, maybe, or the cup, you located it." "The locket," Johnny said. "Yes." Harry nodded. Drank his coffee. Outside, the moor lightened slowly with the coming morning. "How many are left?" he asked. "2 confirmed," Johnny said. "Maybe 3. And mine," Harry said. Evenly. Without drama. "And yours?" "We'll figure it out," Harry said, which was exactly what Johnny had said to him 11 years ago in a destroyed nursery, and Johnny recognized it and felt something complicated and certain move through him like fire. "Yeah," he said. "We will." The morning came up grey and clean and new over the Welsh hills, and the road was still forward, and there was still work to do, and Harry Potter drank his coffee and read his school supply list, and the lightning bolt scar on his forehead caught the morning light and glinted like a thing that had given up trying to hide. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Burned Diagon Alley existed in a state of permanent cognitive dissonance, a place that was simultaneously ancient and commercial, mysterious and mundane, the kind of place where you could buy dragonhide gloves 3 doors down from a shop selling magical maintenance for beginners. Johnny had been in stranger places. He'd been inside a volcano once, on a dare from a demon who had subsequently regretted the dare considerably. But there was something about Diagon Alley that hit differently when you were walking through it with an 11-year-old who was seeing it for the first time and refusing to look impressed. Harry was looking at everything with that particular expression he had, the one that meant he was taking inventory rather than sightseeing. His eyes moved systematically, cataloging, the way they moved over a new engine or a piece of unfamiliar landscape. He had James's hair in its permanent state of insurrection and Lily's green eyes, and he was wearing a leather jacket that was a smaller version of Johnny's, because when Harry was 7 he'd decided that was what jackets looked like, and Johnny hadn't seen any reason to argue. They'd come through the leaky cauldron, which had gone deeply quiet when they walked in. The barman, Tom, an old man with the texture of well-used leather, had looked at Harry for a full 3 seconds, looked at the scar, looked at Johnny, and had the good sense not to say anything beyond pointing them toward the back wall and the archway. The brick wall had opened for Harry's touch without Johnny doing anything, which had made Harry pause and look at his own hand. "It recognized you," Johnny said. "The wall. The magic. It knows what you are." Harry had looked at the archway as it formed, the ripple of old stone yielding like it was glad to, and then stepped through without hesitation, because Harry Potter did not hesitate at thresholds. Johnny had followed, and Diagon Alley had opened around them like an exhalation, and the day had begun. Gringotts first, per the notes. The goblins at the entrance had assessed Harry with the flat professional attention of beings that evaluated value for a living and had therefore become very good at looking past surfaces. One of them, older, with the specific gravitas of seniority, had looked at Harry for a moment longer than the rest. "Mr. Potter," it said. "Harry," Harry said. "And yes. Vault 687, please." The ride to the vault was extraordinary in the way that things that could kill you are always extraordinary, and Harry had gripped the cart's edge and watched the darkness blur past with the focused excitement of someone who doesn't show excitement as excitement but shows it as heightened attention. When the vault opened and the gold was there, stacked in a way that said your parents were not poor and you will never be poor, Harry had stood in the lamplight and been quiet. "Take what you need," Johnny said. "What did it cost them?" Harry asked. Not mournfully, practically. As if he was trying to understand the full accounting. "Their lives," Johnny said. "They knew the cost. They paid it so you'd have a clean start." Harry had taken what he needed. Not excessively, not stingily, measured, considered. Then he'd nodded at the goblin as they left, a real nod, not a performative one, and the goblin had looked mildly startled and nodded back. That had been 2 hours ago. Now they were working their way down the alley with a cart growing heavier by the shop, and the wizarding world was making its adjustments to the presence of Harry Potter in the way that crowds make adjustments to a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading out from where he walked, heads turning, voices dropping. Harry didn't notice. Or he noticed and had decided it wasn't the most interesting thing happening. "Apothecary next," he said, checking the list. He'd taken over navigation of the supply run approximately 15 minutes in, on the grounds that he had the list and Johnny did not, which was reasonable. Then the bookshop, then the robe shop, then Ollivander's. "Wand first," Johnny said. "You need the wand before anything else. You'll feel it." Harry looked at him. "Why?" "Because once you have the wand the rest of the day will make more sense," Johnny said. He was not entirely sure how to explain the feeling he had about this, which was partly the writer's instinct and partly just common sense about the order of operations. "It's like, you don't put the engine in last." Harry considered this analogy and found it acceptable. They redirected toward a narrow shop that looked like it was leaning slightly toward its neighbors for support, the sign above the door reading Ollivander's, makers of fine wands since 382 BC in slightly faded gold letters. The bell above the door rang once, which was more melody than bell, and they went in. The shop was exactly as narrow inside as it looked from outside and considerably taller, the shelves running up into a dimness that suggested the ceiling was either very far away or had given up trying to be visible. The boxes on the shelves were arranged with an archivist's precision, identical in size, different in their labels, thousands of them in rows that disappeared into the upper dark. It smelled of sawdust and something older than sawdust, like the interior of a forest that had been standing since before anyone had thought to name it. Ollivander came out of the back. He was old in the way that certain things were old, the kind of old where you stopped trying to estimate the number and just accepted the category. White hair, silver eyes that had the quality of mirrors rather than windows, hands that moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had spent a century handling things that required care. He stopped when he saw Harry and did what everyone in the wizarding world did when they saw Harry, which was the brief full-stop pause and the look at the scar. Then his silver eyes moved to Johnny, and they stayed there longer. Ollivander had been making wands since before Johnny Blaze was born, and he had the sensitivity of a man who had spent his entire life in proximity to power, which meant he could feel the rider the way animals feel a storm, not the storm itself, but the pressure change that preceded it. "Mr. Potter," Ollivander said, in a voice like old parchment. "We've been expecting you." He paused. "Though perhaps not in quite this configuration." "This is my dad," Harry said, with the careless certainty of someone who has long since settled this definition. Ollivander looked at Johnny again. Johnny met his eyes. The old man nodded once, fractionally, like a man acknowledging a fact he finds unusual but not threatening, and turned back to Harry. "Wand arm?" "Right." What followed was the specific chaos of wand lore in action, box after box retrieved from the shelves with speed that should not have been physically possible for a man of Ollivander's apparent age, each one presented to Harry with a murmured specification, each one attempted and producing results ranging from nothing to a small shower of sparks to, memorably, a box of wand polishing supplies flying off the counter and hitting the far wall. Harry went through the attempts with patience, trying each one exactly as instructed, examining his own reactions with the curiosity of a scientist rather than the anxiety of a student being tested. After the 14th attempt, Ollivander went very quiet for a moment, then disappeared into the back stacks. When he returned, the box in his hands was different from the others, slightly older, the label written in a hand that predated the labeling system currently in use. He held it out. "Holly and phoenix feather," he said. 11 inches. Supple. He paused. This wand, its core feather came from the same phoenix that provided the core for another wand. The brother wand, you might say. He watched Harry with those mirror-bright eyes. That other wand did something very particular, once. Did great things, Harry said, picking up the wand. Or terrible things, depending on your perspective. Ollivander's eyebrows rose. The wand warmed in Harry's hand, and the warmth that came from it and the warmth that was in Harry reached toward each other like two things that had been introduced before, in another room, and recognized the connection. A stream of red and gold sparks rose from the tip in a spiral that went up to the ceiling and lit the top shelves briefly, and the air tasted briefly of a summer storm, and Harry looked at the wand in his hand with the expression of someone confirming a thing they'd suspected. "Yes," Ollivander breathed. "Yes, that's curious. Very curious indeed." "The brother wands," Harry said. He looked at Ollivander with those direct green eyes. "The other one, is it still out there?" Ollivander was quiet for a moment. "I believe so," he said. "With its current owner. Though owner may be a generous term." "The man who killed my parents," Harry said. "Not a question." "The same phoenix's feather," Ollivander said softly. I wonder what it means, that you should end up with this one." He was watching Harry with an expression that might have been wariness in a younger man but in Ollivander read as fascination. "I have sold tens of thousands of wands, Mr. Potter. I remember every one. But I must say, I don't believe I've ever sold a wand to someone who already knew what it was for before he held it." "I know what I'm for," Harry said simply, and paid for the wand, 7 galleons, and turned toward the door. Johnny lingered for a half-second to find Ollivander looking at him with those silver eyes. "He doesn't feel like a child," Ollivander said quietly. "Not accusing. Observing." "No," Johnny said. "He doesn't. Is that a good thing?" "It will be," Johnny said, and followed Harry out. The rest of the shopping was efficient and periodically extraordinary. The bookshop was the longest stop because Harry had the habit of picking up additional titles beyond the list and reading the first 3 pages in the aisle before deciding whether they warranted purchase, and several of them did, a book on defensive magic, one on spell theory, one on magical history that went considerably further back than the Hogwarts curriculum apparently required. The robe shop involved a fitter who measured Harry and then made the observation, to no one in particular, that the measurements were most unusual for a first year, which Harry accepted without comment. The apothecary smelled like the inside of a fever dream, and Harry navigated it by smell as much as by list, pausing at things that weren't on the list to read the labels with that systematic attention. They were eating lunch at a table outside a small cafe near the alley's middle stretch when it happened. The food was good, meat pies and something called butterbeer that Harry examined suspiciously before drinking and which turned out to be warm and sweet and not alcoholic, which Harry expressed mild disappointment about, because he was 11 and had therefore decided that alcohol was something adults used to gatekeep interesting experiences. "That's not," Johnny started. "I know," Harry said. "I'm being funny." "You weren't funny." "I was a little funny." They ate in the comfortable silence that develops between people who have been on long road trips together, which is to say a silence with texture and warmth in it rather than absence of sound. The alley moved around them, witches and wizards doing their shopping, children with parents, the occasional owl, the sound of the leaky cauldron's door opening and closing at the alley's near end. It was the woman who spotted Harry first. She was at a table 2 down from theirs, reading a copy of the Daily Prophet, and she looked up at some random moment and saw Harry, and the specific expression that followed was the one Johnny had come to think of as the recognition, the double take, the eyes going to the scar, the sharp intake of breath, the hand going to the companion's arm. She leaned toward the man she was with and whispered something urgent. Within 30 seconds, people had noticed. Not a mob, the wizarding world was more restrained than that in public, but the attention was palpable, a field of it pressing in from the surrounding tables like a change in air pressure. "They're staring," Harry said, without looking up from his pie. "Yes. Because of the scar." "Because of what the scar means to them," Johnny said. To these people, Harry, you're the reason their war ended. You were a baby and something happened to you that ended the worst period of their history. They don't know how to, they don't know you. They know what you represent." Harry looked up now, a measured survey of the surrounding faces. Several people looked away when his eyes passed over them. A few didn't. "That's a lot of weight to put on someone's forehead," he said. "Yeah. I don't want to be a symbol. I know. I'm a person." "I know," Johnny said. "You're going to have to tell them that. Repeatedly. Some of them will hear it." Harry was quiet, eating his pie. "Then, Dumbledore built a plan around what they think I am." "Yes. Does it bother him that I'm not what he thought?" "Probably," Johnny said. "He's smart enough to adapt, but yes. It probably bothers him." Harry considered this with equanimity, which was his default setting for things that would have destabilized a less settled person. "I'll try not to break everything immediately," he said. "Very generous of you." "I thought so." The man from the neighboring table approached them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing robes that had been patched in several places with the careful patches of someone who didn't have money for new robes but had too much dignity to let the patches look careless. He had red hair and a cheerful sunburned face and the specific energy of a person who could not help being friendly even when he was trying to be discreet. "Sorry to intrude," he said, in a voice that immediately communicated that he was in fact extremely sorry to intrude and had been having an internal debate about whether to approach and had lost the debate. My son's starting at Hogwarts this year as well, and I'm Arthur Weasley." "My wife Molly was hoping, that is," a woman appeared at his shoulder. She was short and round and warm in the way that fires are warm, and she had the same red hair as her husband and the practiced energy of someone who managed a large complicated household without being defeated by it. She was also looking at Harry with an expression that had the same recognition component as everyone else's but also something more than that, something softer, something that had a mother's specific grief in it, because she'd have known what happened in Godric's Hollow and she'd have known what it cost. "Harry Potter," she said, and then stopped herself. "Sorry. Arthur's right, I'm sorry to impose. I'm Molly Weasley. Our son Ronald is starting at Hogwarts this year and you look so like your father." The hair especially. Harry looked at her. Then at Johnny. James's hair, Johnny confirmed. Apparently it's a whole thing with the wizarding world. Harry looked back at Molly Weasley, who was doing a reasonable job of not crying and not entirely succeeding. He was quiet for a moment, and then he stood up from the table and extended his hand with the directness that always struck people who met him for the first time, because it was the directness of someone who has not learned to perform social caution. "Harry," he said. "It's good to meet you." Molly Weasley shook his hand and absolutely did cry, briefly, which she managed with considerable dignity. Arthur Weasley shook his hand next and had the expression of a man containing a strong emotion with some effort. Behind them, a gangly red-haired boy appeared, Ron, presumably, who had his father's broad build in its early form and his mother's warmth in the eyes and the expression of someone who had just been told to come meet the famous Harry Potter and was handling the pressure of that expectation with imperfect composure. "Ron," his mother said. Ron came forward and stuck out his hand with the air of someone performing a task they know will end badly but can see no way out of. "Hi," he said. "I'm Ron." Sorry, I know who you are, this is, hi." Harry shook his hand. "Harry," he said. "This is my dad, Johnny." Johnny nodded at the Weasleys. Molly's eyes moved to him with the same assessment she'd given Harry, and he could see her filing things, the leather jacket, the dark eyes, the fact that he read as something other than a standard wizard even without the writer being visible. She had the instincts of a woman who had raised multiple children through one war and was alert to the early signs of another. "It's good of you to bring him," she said, which was a sentence with layers in it. "It's where he belongs," Johnny said, which was an answer to the layers. Ron and Harry had moved slightly apart and were having what was clearly the beginning of a real conversation, as opposed to the managed introduction, because Harry had asked Ron something about the Chudley cannons based on a button on Ron's jacket and Ron had lit up with the specific illumination of a person asked about their primary enthusiasm by someone who seems genuinely interested rather than politely tolerant. The conversation moved fast from there, the awkwardness burning off, and Johnny watched it from the corner of his eye while he spoke to the elder Weasleys. "He's starting first year," Molly said, confirming it. "Yes," Johnny said. "Late registration, but Dumbledore sorted it." "Will you be," she started, and then reconsidered the question. "Do you have family nearby?" "We're in Wales," Johnny said. "I'll be around." "Of course." She looked at Harry again, who was laughing at something Ron had said, a real laugh, the shoulders-back laugh that was James's. He's not what I expected." "No," Johnny said. "He isn't." "He seems very grounded," Molly said, which was both an accurate description and a politely encoded question about how a child who went through what Harry went through ended up grounded rather than otherwise. "He's Harry," Johnny said, which didn't explain anything and also explained everything, and Molly Weasley looked at him with the eyes of a woman who understood exactly what that meant. They parted ways outside the cafe, with Ron loudly confirming that he was also in first year and would presumably be on the same train, and Harry nodding in the way that communicated that Ron was acceptable company, which was Harry's version of enthusiasm. The Weasleys swept back toward the robe shop with the coordinated energy of a large family in motion, and Harry and Johnny stood in the alley's midday foot traffic and watched them go. "I like him," Harry said. "Ron?" "Yeah." "Good," Johnny said. They were heading for the Leaky Cauldron, the day's shopping done and the cart levitated by Harry with an ease that suggested he'd been practicing that one specifically, when the other encounter happened. Johnny felt it coming before it was visible, not the rider, exactly, but Johnny's own instinct, the one that had kept him alive in environments that didn't favor survival. A particular flavor of attention in the air, focused and cold. The boy was standing outside Madame Malkin's robe shop with two large boys and an adult Johnny identified in approximately 4 seconds as Lucius Malfoy. He was blonde, pale, with pointed features and the specific bearing of a child who had been told from birth that his bearing was important. He was looking at Harry with that mixture of calculation and social performance that some children develop early as a survival mechanism in households where social performance is currency. Lucius Malfoy's eyes had already found Johnny and stayed there, and in those grey eyes was something that was not fear but was in the same postal district as fear. He knew what Johnny was. Not specifically, perhaps, but the writer left traces in the world the way a fire leaves the smell of smoke. You might not see the fire, but the air around Johnny Blaze smelled like judgment, and men who had done the things Lucius Malfoy had done knew that smell. "That's Harry Potter," the blond boy said to his companions, loud enough to carry. Not viciously, assessingly. He looked at Harry the way you'd look at something you were trying to decide how to categorize. Harry looked back. "Draco Malfoy," the boy said, extending his hand with the practiced grace of a child who had been learning social combat since he could walk. "I imagine we'll be in the same house." Harry looked at the extended hand. He looked at Draco. He looked at Lucius, briefly, with those clear green eyes, and Lucius's expression shifted by several degrees towards something colder and more controlled. Then Harry looked back at Draco. "Maybe," Harry said. He didn't shake the hand. Not rudely, he just didn't, the way you don't accept a trade you haven't fully evaluated. "We'll see how the sorting goes." Draco's hand stayed out for a moment, then retracted. Something moved behind his eyes, recalibration, the adjustment of an assessment. He'd expected the famous Harry Potter to be either overwhelmed by the recognition or eager for the alliance. He'd gotten neither. "Your father?" Draco asked, nodding toward Johnny. "Yes," Harry said. Draco's eyes moved to Johnny. Johnny met them without expression. Beside Draco, Lucius had gone very still in the way that large predators go still when they encounter something on the food chain that makes the food chain feel unreliable. "Johnny Blaze," Draco said, like he was reading from a file. He'd been briefed. Of course he'd been briefed. Lucius Malfoy would have been preparing his son for this encounter the moment the Hogwarts letters went out. "I've heard of you." "Most people have," Johnny said. Another moment of recalibration in Draco's eyes. Then, with the adaptability that would have surprised people who'd written him off as merely arrogant, "It should be an interesting year," he said, to Harry. "It usually is," Harry said, and they moved on. 20 feet down the alley, out of earshot, Harry said, "The father. He's done something." "Yes," Johnny said. "Something bad." "Very bad," Johnny said. "He's done a lot of very bad things and he's never been held accountable for them because he's wealthy and connected and smart about covering his tracks." "Will he be?" Harry asked. "Held accountable?" "Eventually," Johnny said. Harry nodded, filing it. "The son's smarter than people will expect," he said. "Probably. That could go either way." "Most smart people go either way," Johnny said. "It's the question of what they're smart in service of." Harry thought about that as they pushed through the leaky cauldron's back door and back into the mundane London afternoon. The transition from the alley to the street was always jarring, the noise, the scale, the absence of magic in the ambient air, and Harry blinked once, adjusting, and then was fine. They ate dinner in a pub near King's Cross, because the train was tomorrow and they'd gotten a hotel nearby, and over fish and chips Harry read the first 2 chapters of his spell theory textbook and Johnny read a newspaper, and it was comfortable and domestic and ordinary in all the ways that their life was never actually ordinary. "Can I ask you something?" Harry said, not looking up from the book. "Always." "Dumbledore. Do you trust him?" Johnny set down the newspaper. He thought about it honestly, because Harry always knew when he wasn't thinking honestly. "I trust that he's on the right side," he said. "And I trust that he's very smart. And I trust that his plan for you is different from what he expected, and that he'll try to adapt." He paused. "I don't trust that his judgment about what's good for you will always match mine. Or yours. But he's not an enemy. No. He's complicated. He's the kind of person who's right about most things and wrong about the methods, and the wrong methods can do a lot of damage even when the destination is correct." Harry absorbed this. "He built a plan around a version of me that doesn't exist," he said. Yeah. So he has to build a new plan. That's his problem to solve, Johnny said. Yours is to be exactly who you are and not apologize for it. Harry looked at him then, and for a moment he looked exactly his age, not younger, because Harry had never really looked younger than he was, but his age, 11 and clear-eyed and the inheritor of a war he didn't start and the carrier of a soul fragment he didn't ask for and the son of dead parents he never got to know. Are you going to be okay? Harry asked. While I'm at school. The question landed with the specific weight of something that has been carefully carried for a while before being set down. Johnny looked at his kid, James's kid, his kid, this kid who had somehow become both things without any confusion, and felt that thing in his chest that the writer had no category for but which was, by every available metric, love. I've got work to do, Johnny said. There are still Horcruxes to hunt. I know, Harry said. I mean beyond that. Yeah, Johnny said. I'll be okay. Harry nodded and went back to his book. The morning of September 1st came in clear and slightly cold, the way London mornings sometimes did in a way that felt like an apology for everything else London weather usually attempted. King's Cross was its usual controlled chaos, families with luggage, the sound of announcements over the PA, the smell of diesel and coffee and the particular human scent of a place where a lot of people are trying to be somewhere else. Platform 9 3/4 was reached through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, which Harry walked through without slowing, because they discussed the mechanics and Harry's response to the mechanics had been to simply decide they were real and proceed accordingly, which was the most effective approach to most magical infrastructure. The Hogwarts Express was already there, a scarlet steam engine that looked like it had been designed by someone who deeply loved trains and wanted everyone to know it, breathing steam in the autumn air with the patient authority of things that have been doing their job reliably for a long time. Johnny stood on the platform with him. The Weasley family was somewhere in the crowd, he could see the distinctive architecture of Molly Weasley's presence, the way she organized space around herself without intending to. Other families were everywhere, children and trunks and owls and the particular anxiety of first departures. Harry had his trunk and his owl, a snowy owl he'd picked out at the magical menagerie with characteristic decisiveness and named Athena, which Johnny had thought was a solid choice, and his wand in his jacket pocket and 10 years of road life education in his head, and he was standing on the platform looking at the train with the expression of someone about to begin the next phase of a campaign they've been planning for a while. Don't set anything permanently on fire, Johnny said. No promises, Harry said. Try not to terrify the other first years immediately. I'll terrify them gradually, Harry said. It's more humane. Harry. I know, Harry said, and turned and looked at him, and there was nothing complicated in it, just the clear directness that was Harry's most fundamental characteristic. I know. Johnny put his hand on Harry's shoulder for a moment. He thought about saying something significant, something about James and Lily, something about what this moment meant, something about the road that had brought them to this platform from a ruined house in Godric's Hollow 10 years and a lifetime ago. He decided against it, because Harry had the information already and statements of the obvious were not what this moment needed. I'll be here when you get off for Christmas, he said. Right platform this time, Harry said. Not the wrong side of the barrier again like that one time in Zurich. There were extenuating circumstances in Zurich. There are always extenuating circumstances with you. He picked up Athena's cage and his trunk handle and walked toward the train, and Johnny watched him go, and Harry didn't look back, not because he was being dramatic about it but because Harry had never been the type to look back. Forward. Always forward. The train began to move at 11 precisely. Johnny stood on the platform until the red end of it had disappeared around the bend, taking the sound of it with it, and then the platform was just a platform, ordinary people standing in ordinary steam. He walked back through the barrier to the mundane side and found the motorcycle at the curb outside the station where he'd left it, and he sat on it for a moment without starting it. The rider was alert. Not urgently, patiently. That banked fire patience that meant there was a target and a direction and it was waiting for Johnny to point them there. There were 2 Horcruxes left that he'd located. The cup was in Gringotts, which was going to be a problem of the first order, because Gringotts's wards were not designed for human intrusion and were considerably more robust in their response to supernatural intrusion. He'd been circling that problem for months. The diadem he could feel somewhere in Scotland, somewhere near the school, in something old and hidden and patient, the room of requirement, the writer suggested, though it hadn't shown him the specific location yet. The ring had been in a ruined house in Little Hangleton and had cost him 3 weeks of recovery because the ring had been cursed in a way that was designed to destroy exactly the kind of entity that was most likely to try to destroy it, and he'd had to let the writer burn very hot for a very long time to get through that one. He still felt it, sometimes, in the deep structure of his bones. The snake. Nagini. He couldn't find her because she was with what was left of Voldemort, and what was left of Voldemort was so diminished and so hidden that even the writer's senses couldn't pin the location yet. It would come. Everything came eventually. And the shard in Harry's scar, which was last on the list because it had to be, because the solution to that problem had to exist and Johnny was going to find it before they reached it. He was not accepting the alternative. The writer, when pressed, showed him something, an image, not fully formed, of death that could be voluntarily entered and voluntarily left. A threshold that was also a door. It was not complete information and it was not a plan. But it was a direction. He started the bike. The engine turned over with its deep familiar rumble and the morning London traffic looked at him the way morning London traffic always looked at a man on a motorcycle, with the specific mixture of envy and mild concern. He had work to do, and a school full of Horcruxes to hunt around, and a castle full of old wards that would make his life interesting, and somewhere in Britain a fragment of Voldemort that was getting more desperate by the year as the pieces it was anchored to went out one by one like candles. He rode north. Chapter 3, The Sorting of Harry Blaze. The Hogwarts Express arrived at Hogsmeade Station at dusk, and the castle was lit up on its hill like something that had decided to be magnificent and had been achieving it consistently for 1,000 years. Most of the first years leaned toward the windows when it came into view. Harry looked at it once, filed it, and went back to the conversation he was having with Ron about whether the Chudley Cannon's current season was a sign of genuine improvement or a statistical anomaly. "It's not a statistical anomaly," Ron said, with the conviction of someone who has been defending this position for years and has become better at it through necessity. "They won 3 consecutive matches in October. That's not anomalous. That's a pattern." 3 matches isn't a pattern, Harry said. 3 matches is a data point that wants to be a pattern. Ron looked at him. "You sound like my brother Percy." "Is that bad?" "Percy's insufferable," Ron said. "But he's also usually right, which makes it worse." He paused. "You're less insufferable than Percy, for what it's worth." "High bar." "It's the bar I've got." Hermione Granger had joined their compartment approximately 40 minutes out of London and had not left, which had initially seemed like it might be temporary but had settled into something more permanent as the journey continued. She was reading a book that was not on the first-year curriculum and had been providing unrequested but accurate commentary on things Harry and Ron said when the things they said touched on areas she'd researched. She did this without looking up from the book, which Harry had found interesting rather than annoying, because the information was usually good. "Hogsmeade," she said now, still reading. "We're nearly there. You should change into robes." "I know," Harry said. "The boats across the lake are traditional for first years." "Hagrid usually, Hermione," Harry said. She looked up. "I know," he said. Not unkindly, he'd figured out in the first hour of knowing her that she processed anxiety by preparing, and preparation expressed as information was not the same thing as condescension, it just sounded like it. "I read the history." "We're ready." She looked at him with those sharp brown eyes. She'd been doing this periodically throughout the journey, looking at him with the expression of someone whose mental model of a person keeps failing to account for the actual person. She'd had a clear image of who Harry Potter was before she got on this train, assembled from books and the limited biographical information available in the wizarding world, and Harry kept being not that. "You don't seem nervous," she said. "Should I be?" "Most people are. On the first day. The sorting especially, the hat reads your mind, technically, it's Good, Harry said. Then it'll get accurate information. She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to her book, but something in the set of her shoulders had shifted, the specific relaxation of someone who has decided, provisionally, that a situation is more interesting than it is threatening. I'm Hermione Granger, she said to the book. I know, Harry said. You introduced yourself when you came in. I know I did, it's good to meet you, Hermione, Harry said. Properly. She looked up again, and this time the sharp assessment had something else in it, something that wasn't in her books and therefore took her slightly longer to identify. She went back to reading, but she was smiling at the page, just briefly. Ron was watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching a tennis match and trying to figure out who was winning. The boats across the lake were cold and dark and the castle above them grew as they crossed the water in a way that was designed to be overwhelming and succeeded. Harry watched it come down at them and felt the castle's magic the way he felt all old magic, as a pressure change, as a texture in the air, as something the writer in him recognized and respected. The wards on Hogwarts were extraordinary. Old beyond ordinary understanding, layered over centuries, interlocked in ways that made them not just powerful but structural, as if the magic was part of what was holding the stone up. He could feel the boundary where the rider stopped. It was somewhere in the lake, he thought, somewhere between the shore and the castle, a line in the ambient magic that said no further, not this thing, not here. He'd felt Johnny stop at that line the moment he'd crossed it, not physically but in that specific sense that had lived in him since infancy, the background awareness of where Johnny was that was like knowing which direction north was. North had stopped, for now. He was on this side of the lake alone. He was fine. The castle interior hit them with warmth and the smell of old stone and torchlight and centuries of human habitation, and Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall with the energy of someone who had done this exact thing many times and still took it seriously, which Harry respected immediately. She was tall and severe and precise, and she looked the assembled first years over with the practiced assessment of an educator who can sort the anxious from the excited from the bewildered at a glance. Her eyes stopped on Harry for exactly as long as everyone else's did, and then moved on, which made her immediately distinguishable from most of the wizarding world Harry had encountered so far. Welcome to Hogwarts, she said, and meant it without performing it. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly. While you wait, I suggest you compose yourselves. She left them in the antechamber. Immediately around Harry the ambient anxiety level of the first-year group went up, because that's what happened when an authority figure left a room full of 11-year-olds who were about to be publicly evaluated. Ron was doing something with his hands that might have been the early stages of a nervous gesture. Hermione had her book out again and was rereading a passage about the sorting hat with the focused concentration of someone doing last-minute revision. The ghosts came through the wall. Most of the first years reacted to this as the situation warranted, with startled sounds and defensive backward movements. Harry looked at the ghosts with the calm of someone for whom the metaphysical is background information. They were interesting, actually, he could feel what they were with the writer's senses, the way you'd feel the ambient temperature. Not departed, not arrived, caught in the space between in the specific way of people who'd been unable or unwilling to go through the door. Not threatening. Just, waiting, in their own way. Peeves would have been more interesting, but Peeves was apparently elsewhere. The Great Hall was exactly as impressive as its name suggested, which was an achievement in nomenclature. The enchanted ceiling showed a night sky with low clouds, the torches on the walls and floating above the tables throwing warm unsteady light over 4 long tables of students who all turned to look at the first years coming through the doors. Harry assessed the hall in one sweep, the tables, the teachers at the high table, the ancient stool at the front with the battered hat on it, and Dumbledore in the center of the high table, who was watching the first years come in with those bright blue eyes and who found Harry in the line almost immediately. Harry met his eyes for a moment. Dumbledore's expression was unreadable in the way that very good card players are unreadable, the baseline was warmth and wisdom, so it was almost impossible to see what was happening underneath. Harry filed him for later and looked at the hat. The hat twitched. Then it opened its brim and sang. It was a good song, better than Harry had expected from a hat. It covered the history of Hogwarts and the nature of the four houses with the rhetorical confidence of something that had been performing this function since the 10th century and had gotten quite good at it. Harry listened to it properly, because it was providing actual information about how the sorting worked from the sorting hat's own perspective, which was primary source material. When the song ended and McGonagall unrolled the list, Harry settled in to watch. The students ahead of him in the alphabet went quickly, some with hesitation, most within a minute, the hat calling its decisions with the authority of something that did not second-guess itself. Neville Longbottom went to Gryffindor after a hat that seemed to be having a conversation with itself. Draco Malfoy sat down and the hat said Slytherin almost before it touched his head, which was not a surprise to anyone who'd met Draco Malfoy. Granger, Hermione. She went up with her chin at the angle of someone trying to look confident and nearly succeeding. The hat was on her head for approximately 4 seconds before it said, Gryffindor, and she sat down at the Gryffindor table with the relief of someone whose research had been validated. Ron was called and went, his ears red, and the hat kept him for about 30 seconds in what looked like a conversation before announcing Gryffindor. Ron sat down with the relief of a youngest of several siblings who has achieved a family expectation and can now relax. Potter, Harry. The hall went the way halls went when Harry's name was called. Not silent, something more than silent, a held breath quality, every face turning, the whispers that had been running through the student body since the first years entered crystallizing into a single point of attention. Harry walked up the aisle between the tables and sat on the stool and felt the sorting hat come down over his head and into the dark. The hat's voice was in his head immediately. Not loud, present. Like someone sitting down next to you in a quiet room. Well, the hat said. This is different. Harry waited. Different from what? He thought back. From most heads I've sat on in the last century, the hat said. Most heads are, forgive the metaphor, room temperature. You're not. That's inherited, Harry said. Partially, the hat said. But not entirely. The fire in you isn't all from outside. Some of it is yours. It was quiet for a moment, and Harry had the sense of something old and perceptive moving through the upper registers of his thinking, not intrusively, not like a violation, more like a thorough librarian who knew where everything was. You know what you're carrying, the hat said. Yes. Most people I sort don't know themselves this well at 11. I had a good teacher, Harry said. You had an unusual teacher, the hat said, with something that might have been dry humor. Now. Where to put you? Another pause. You have the bravery for Gryffindor. Unambiguously. But you have the intelligence for Ravenclaw and the loyalty for Hufflepuff and, yes, you have the ambition for Slytherin. Real ambition, the kind that knows what it's for. It seemed to consider. What do you want? I want to finish what needs finishing, Harry said. I want to learn everything I need to know to do that. And I want to choose my own direction while I do it. Most people want the house that matches their strongest trait, the hat said. I'm not most people. No, the hat agreed. You really aren't. Another long pause. In the hall, the held breath quality was extending into the kind of silence that starts generating its own noise. You could be great in any of them, you know. Genuinely. That's unusual. What you are is, you're the kind of person a house shapes around rather than being shaped by. Do you understand what I mean? Yes, Harry said. Then I'll put you where the fire started, the hat said, with a finality that suggested it had made up its mind some time ago and had been confirming the reasoning. The courage to face what you've been given, without flinching, without hiding, that's Gryffindor at its best. And you are Gryffindor at its best, Harry Potter. Then, out loud, to the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, set it back on the stool with a nod, you nodded at things that had treated you with respect, and walked to the Gryffindor table while the rest of the hall stared. He sat down between Ron and a gap that Hermione cheerfully moved to fill, and the table's welcome washed over him, and he accepted it with the ease of someone who has decided that this is where they are and this is fine. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching him with that calculating look, reassessing again, filing the new information. At the high table, Dumbledore was smiling. It was a real smile, not a performed one, or if it was performed by someone who felt the underlying emotion. Beside him, Snape was doing nothing with his face at all, which was itself a significant expression. Harry looked at Snape and Snape looked back at him, and in the space of that brief exchange several things happened. Harry felt the writer's awareness sharpen, not because Snape was evil, he wasn't, or not entirely, or not now, but because Snape was complicated in the specific way that the writer paid attention to, the way a wound is complicated. Snape's dark eyes moved over Harry with something that started as assessment and then shifted to something else, something more raw, something that was Lily's eyes in James's face looking back at him across a great hall. Snape looked away first. Harry filed it. The feast appeared, which was one of the more impressive logistical demonstrations Harry had seen, and conversation at the Gryffindor table resumed with the specific energy of people who have just survived a collective anxiety and are now celebrating. Ron explained Quidditch to Harry with the enthusiasm of a natural evangelist, and Hermione explained the academic structure of Hogwarts to both of them with the enthusiasm of a natural academic, and the twin explanations ran parallel for a while before converging on the topic of how to balance Quidditch practices with study schedules, which was apparently a perennial conflict. Harry ate and listened and occasionally contributed and gradually mapped the table. The Weasley twins were several seats down, Fred and George, identical and electric, the kind of people who made a room's energy rise just by being in it. Neville was across from him, carefully eating as if the food might require formal approval. Percy Weasley was at the prefect end of the table, radiating the authority of someone who has been given a badge and has decided the badge is load-bearing. The castle was alive around them. Not metaphorically, Harry could feel it the way he'd feel a fire in the next room, the ambient magic of it, old and deep and genuinely aware in some distributed way that wasn't consciousness exactly but wasn't nothing either. The wards were part of that. The portraits, the ghosts, the staircases that moved, all of it was interconnected in a way that suggested the building had developed opinions over its 1,000 years. After the feast, Dumbledore stood and spoke, and Harry listened to him properly. He was very good, the speeches were calibrated and warm and managed the tone of the room with the skill of someone who had been doing it for decades. But Harry caught the mechanisms of it the way you catch the gears of a good watch, the way the warmth was real but also deployed, the way the humor was genuine but also structural. Dumbledore spoke about the third-floor corridor, forbidden, dangerous, do not go there, with the specific emphasis of someone who knew that telling 11-year-olds not to do something was an invitation to do it, and Harry wondered whether that was a miscalculation or a deliberate design. He decided, provisionally, that it was deliberate, and that the game Dumbledore was playing was longer and more complex than the current move suggested, and he filed that too. Snape caught him in the corridor. Not caught, appeared, which was different, a sudden presence materializing from a shadow with the efficiency of someone who had learned to move through spaces without announcing himself. Harry stopped and looked up at him, and Snape looked down, and the corridor was briefly just the two of them and the guttering torchlight. "Potter," Snape said. His voice was exactly what his face was, controlled, precise, with something underneath that the control was working to contain. "I trust the journey was satisfactory." "Yes, thank you," Harry said. Snape's eyes moved over him with the specificity of a diagnostic. "You look like your father," he said. "So I've heard," Harry said. "I knew your father," Snape said. "At school." The sentence had the shape of a provocation but the weight of something else, something that had been carried for a long time and was not entirely sure what it wanted to be now. "I know," Harry said. Snape's eyes sharpened. "You know. Johnny told me about the people my parents knew," Harry said. "Enough to know that it's complicated. Enough to know that simple answers about who is good to who are probably wrong." He met Snape's eyes steadily. "If you have a problem with me because of my dad, I'd rather you told me directly than managed it slowly. I prefer direct." Snape looked at him for a long moment, and something behind his controlled expression moved like weather behind a window, shifting, not quite resolving. "Your mother," he said finally, quietly. "You have her eyes." "Yes," Harry said. "She was." Snape stopped. The word he didn't say sat in the corridor between them with considerable weight. "She was exceptional," he said instead. "I know," Harry said again, and this time he meant it differently, and Snape heard the difference, because something in his face shifted towards something that wasn't quite warmth but was in the same geographical region. "You will find my class demanding," Snape said, returning to the controlled mode, the professor mode, the mode he used to not be the other thing. "I expect preparation. I do not repeat instructions." "Understood," Harry said. "Your guardian," Snape said, with the delicate precision of someone navigating a word that doesn't quite fit the situation. "Blaze. He has a reputation." "Yes," Harry said. "In certain circles," Snape said. "Circles that are relevant to your particular situation." Harry waited. "I am aware," Snape said, very carefully, "that there is work being done. Outside these walls." His eyes were fixed on Harry with an intensity that was communicating a great deal more than the words were. "I would advise against complacency. About the nature of that work." "I'm not complacent," Harry said. Snape held his gaze for another moment, then nodded once, the same fractional nod that Ollivander had used, the nod of someone acknowledging a fact and choosing not to elaborate, and moved away down the corridor in the direction he'd come from, the torchlight making his shadow elongated and theatrical. Harry watched him go and thought, that was someone telling me he's on the right side in the only way he knows how to tell it, which is sideways. He filed it and went to find the Gryffindor common room. The weeks of September moved through Hogwarts the way first weeks at a new school always moved, with the fast slow rhythm of new things arriving faster than they could be processed, making the individual days long and the collective time short. Harry moved through it with the adaptability of a child raised on the road, finding his footing in the new landscape by the simple method of paying attention and adjusting. Magic lessons were interesting. Not difficult. Difficult would come, Harry knew, and he was looking forward to it in the way that you look forward to a challenge you've been training for, but interesting, because the mechanics of magic as taught at Hogwarts were different from the intuitive, pressure-tested magic that had been developing in him since childhood. The formal system was elegant. It gave what he'd been doing instinctively a language and a logic, and that was satisfying in the same way that understanding the theory behind an engine you've been fixing by instinct was satisfying. Charms was good. Transfiguration was excellent. McGonagall ran the most precisely managed classroom Harry had been in, and he respected precision. Defense against the dark arts was taught by Quirrell in a manner that was both professionally adequate and personally uncomfortable, because Quirrell gave Harry the same feeling that the Horcrux signatures gave him, not identical, but in the same family of wrongness. Something in Quirrell was not aligned correctly with the world. Harry couldn't identify it from the first week and didn't try, he just noted it and kept noting it. Potions was Snape's domain, and Snape's domain was a fascinating ecosystem. Snape taught from a position of total technical mastery and deployed that mastery as a kind of authority that didn't require the traditional structures of approval. He didn't need students to like him. He needed them to learn, and fear and respect were both adequate vehicles for learning, and he used both without apology. On the first day of potions, Snape had stood before the class and asked his rapid-fire questions with the specific aim of establishing hierarchy, Neville reduced to stammering, Hermione raising her hand with such force she might have launched herself, various others revealed as underprepared. Then Snape had looked at Harry and asked, in his precise controlled way, "Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" The room held its breath in the specific way rooms held their breath when they were expecting someone to be publicly humiliated. "Draught of living death," Harry said. "It's one of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The asphodel is a narcotic base, the wormwood modifies the duration and depth. The ratio is critical, too much asphodel and the drinker doesn't wake up at all." Snape had looked at him for a long moment. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat," Harry said. Or the stomach of various other ruminants, though goat is most potent and most accessible. It's an antidote to most poisons, the calcified mass absorbs the toxic compounds. Another silence. What is the difference, Snape said, very quietly, between monkshood and wolfsbane? Nothing, Harry said. They're both names for aconitum. Same plant. Snape stared at him. The class was very quiet in the way classes were quiet when the expected outcome had not occurred and no one was sure how to recalibrate. It appears, Snape said slowly, that not everyone comes to this class entirely unprepared. He moved away down the row of students and began the lesson proper, and if there was something in his voice that was not quite satisfaction but was approximately adjacent to it, only Harry noticed, because Harry was the only one paying that kind of attention. Hermione leaned over afterward and whispered, "How did you know all of that?" "Books," Harry said. "Which books?" "The ones on the reading list," Harry said. "And a few that weren't." She looked at him with those sharp eyes. "You actually read them. That's what books are for." "Most people don't," she said. "I thought I was the only one who," she stopped. "You're not," Harry said. She absorbed this with the careful pleasure of someone receiving information they'd hoped was true but hadn't verified. "I'm going to be studying in the library on Thursday evenings," she said, to her potions textbook. "If you wanted to, if either of you wanted to study together." "I'm in," Harry said. "I'm also in," Ron said from Harry's other side, "though I should be honest that my contribution will mostly be questions." "Questions are fine," Hermione said. "Good questions move things forward." "Mine are mostly not good questions," Ron said. "Ron's questions are usually more interesting than he thinks they are," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It was an observation," Harry said. "It can be both." The friendship formed the way good friendships formed, not in a single moment of declaration but in an accumulation of small choices, the decision to sit next to someone, the decision to be honest instead of strategic, the decision to let someone see you being wrong and not perform embarrassment about it. By the end of September the three of them occupied a specific gravitational cluster in the Gryffindor year group, Harry at the center not by ambition but by the specific force of personality that drew people toward a calm point. Draco observed this from across the great hall with the focused attention of someone studying a chessboard. He and Harry had spoken several times in the corridors, neutral conversations, the specific neutrality of two people who haven't decided what they are to each other yet. Draco was smarter in person than his reputation in the wizarding world suggested, which was interesting. He was also performing more than he was being, which was something Harry recognized, because he'd grown up around someone who had had to decide very specifically what he was going to show the world and what he wasn't. One evening in mid-October, Draco had appeared at Harry's elbow in the library and said, quietly, so it didn't carry to Hermione and Ron 2 tables over, "Your father was in Malfoy Manor in August." Harry looked at him. "My father didn't tell me what happened," Draco said. "But something did. He's been," he paused, choosing words with visible care. "Different. Since then." "I'm sorry to hear that," Harry said. Draco looked at him. "Are you?" "I'm sorry it affected you," Harry said, which was a different answer, and Draco heard the difference. "What is he?" Draco asked. "Your father." "What is he?" "He's my dad," Harry said simply. "That's not what I meant." "I know," Harry said. "But it's the most accurate answer." He held Draco's gaze steadily. "Whatever happened at your house, Draco, that wasn't aimed at you." Draco absorbed this. His jaw was set in a line that was his version of processing something emotionally complicated without showing it, which Harry recognized as a family-learned behavior. "He took something," Draco said. "From the house. Something my father valued. The locket." Johnny had retrieved something from the Burke family, but Malfoy Manor, that had been earlier, the visit that Lucius Malfoy had not discussed with anyone. Whatever had been at Malfoy Manor, the writer had taken it. Harry kept his face neutral. "I can't discuss my father's work," Harry said. Can't or won't? Both, Harry said honestly. Draco looked at him for another long moment, that recalibrating look, and then he nodded, the same fractional nod that apparently ran in certain wizarding families as the gesture for I acknowledge this and will not press it further at this time, and walked away. Hermione appeared at Harry's shoulder approximately 4 seconds later. What was that about? Politics, Harry said. You're 11, she said. So is he, Harry said. That doesn't make it less political. She looked at the space Draco had vacated and then back at Harry with the expression of someone revising their model of a situation. Is he going to be a problem? No, Harry said. I don't think he is. I think he's trying to figure out who he is separate from who his father is, and he doesn't have very good tools for it. That's quite a generous reading, Hermione said. I might be wrong, Harry said. But I'd rather be wrong about someone potentially good than right about someone I've dismissed too early. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's very mature. Don't tell Ron, Harry said. He'll be insufferable about it. I heard that, Ron said from his table. The Quidditch tryouts in October produced an unexpected development, which was that Harry was extraordinarily good on a broomstick. Not in the way of someone who had trained formally. He'd never been near a broomstick before, but in the way of someone who had spent years on the back of a motorcycle moving at speeds and in conditions that formal training would never have replicated, and the intuitive three-dimensional spatial awareness transferred with remarkable directness to aerial maneuvering. Wood had seen him catch Neville's Remembrall on reflex from 50 feet in a dive and had gone to McGonagall before Harry's feet were back on the ground. McGonagall had told Harry he'd be playing Seeker for Gryffindor. She'd told him in the corridor, very quickly, then walked away as if she might be slightly embarrassed by her own excitement, which Harry found endearing in someone who spent most of her time being unassailably composed. He wrote to Johnny about it. The response arrived 3 days later, carried by Athena, who had strong opinions about post schedules. Good. Physical confidence is never wasted. Don't let it become arrogance. There's always someone better at any given thing, and the moment you forget that is the moment you start making mistakes that get you hurt. Also, the ring is gone. 2 confirmed remaining plus the snake. Working on the cup. Gringotts is complicated but I'm figuring it out. Stay sharp. Harry read it at breakfast, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. Ron was watching. Your dad writes short letters, Ron said. He's concise, Harry said. My mum's letters are about 4 times that length and that's when nothing interesting is happening, Ron said, not without affection. Did you know, Hermione said, not looking up from her toast, that the record for the shortest letter in recorded history was 3 words. Sent by Victor Hugo to his publisher asking how his book was selling. What did it say? Ron asked. Just a question mark, Hermione said. And the publisher responded with an exclamation point. Ron stared at her. How do you know that? I read, Hermione said. Harry reads and he doesn't know random facts about Victor Hugo's punctuation. I might, Harry said. Do you? No, Harry said. But I thought about it. Ron pointed at him. That's worse. November came in cold and sharp, and Hogwarts settled into the rhythm of the academic year with the steady momentum of a thing in motion. Harry moved through it, learning, watching, building. The thing with Quirrell had been building since September. Harry had been tracking it the way you tracked anything the writer flagged, patiently, without rushing the observation into a conclusion. It wasn't until mid-November that he had enough data points to form a coherent picture, and the picture was this: Quirrell was not simply nervous or eccentric. Quirrell was occupied. Inhabited, in the same way a house can be inhabited by something that shouldn't be there. The smell was what confirmed it. Not a physical smell, the writer's sensory register, that below-language awareness of things that violated the natural order. Harry got it from Quirrell one morning in defense class, when Quirrell leaned over his desk to correct something in his notes, and it was unmistakable, the same signature as the Horcruxes, the same scent of death cheated and identity fractured, but alive, active, pressing against the inside of Quirrell's body the way a fire presses against the inside of a lantern. Harry straightened up and looked at the back of Quirrell's turban and thought, oh. He told no one. Not yet. He wrote to Johnny that night, short, specific, the communication style of people who had learned to be precise in writing because long letters could be read by the wrong eyes. Quirrell. Defense teacher. Carrying something. Same kind of wrong as what we've been clearing. But alive. Come when you can, not urgent but soon. The response came back in 2 days. Already knew. Couldn't tell you before, didn't want to bias your observations. You felt it yourself, which is better. Don't move on him alone. Keep watching. I'll be in Hogsmeade on the 30th. We'll talk. Don't do anything dramatic. Harry had folded that letter too and put it with the first one. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 4, The Stone and the Fire. The third-floor corridor smelled like something was trying very hard to stay alive. Harry had been past it 3 times, twice incidentally, navigating the castle's geography, once deliberately, standing at the locked door for 40 seconds with his hand an inch from the wood, reading what the door put out the way the writer had taught him to read things. The door itself was nothing special. What was behind it was another matter. Something old and hungry and patient in a way that only things without brains could be patient, and something else underneath that, smaller, quieter, the specific vibration he'd learned to identify as a Horcrux signature, except this one was threaded through with something more active, more present, more aware. Not a Horcrux. But adjacent. A fragment wearing a face. He met Johnny in Hogsmeade on the 30th of November, a Saturday, which was a Hogsmeade weekend for older students but not for first years, which meant Harry had to get there by a route that wasn't the front gates. He'd found the route in October, a passage through a one-eyed witch statue that led out behind the Honeyduke's cellar, which he'd located by the simple method of exploring the castle systematically in the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the corridors were empty. He left a note for Ron, out for the morning, back by lunch, and was through the passage by 8. The village was cold and grey and mostly quiet at that hour, the shops just opening, a handful of older students visible in the distance. Johnny was leaning against the motorcycle outside the 3 Broomsticks with a coffee cup in his hand, wearing his jacket and looking exactly as he always looked everywhere, which was like something that belonged to a landscape slightly more extreme than whatever landscape he was currently in. Harry walked up and took the coffee cup out of his hand, drank from it, handed it back. You found a way out, Johnny said. There are about 7 passages in the castle that aren't in Filch's files, Harry said. I found 4 of them. And you know this how? Castle's alive, Harry said. If you listen to it, it shows you things. Johnny looked at him. You've been talking to the castle. Not talking, Harry said. Listening. It's different. Fair enough. Johnny drank his coffee. Quirrell. He's carrying Voldemort, Harry said. Not a Horcrux, what's left of him directly. Some kind of possession or parasitic attachment. I felt it in October. Your letter said you already knew. Felt it the first time I got close to the school, Johnny said. That boundary where I can't cross, Quirrell was near the edge once, in September, and the writer lit up like a flare. He looked at the 3 Broomsticks fogged window. The problem is the school wards. As long as he's inside Hogwarts, I can't get to him. And you can't get into Hogwarts. Correct. Harry was quiet for a moment, watching his own breath fog in the cold air. What's in the 3rd-floor corridor is connected to him, he said. It's a trap or a test, someone put something there deliberately, and whatever it is sits between Quirrell and what he's actually after. The Philosopher's Stone, Johnny said. Dumbledore moved it from Gringotts in July. Someone tried to break into the vault the same day Harry's key was collected, same day we were in the bank. Quirrell, Harry said. Quirrell, Johnny confirmed. He missed it by hours. So Dumbledore moved it here, put it behind a series of obstacles. Each one set by a different teacher. He looked at Harry. It's a good plan, actually. The protections aren't just physical, they test different kinds of intelligence. Quirrell could probably get through most of them, but Voldemort in a weakened state, sharing a body, limited in what he can do, the obstacles slow him down enough that Dumbledore can respond. Except Dumbledore won't always be here, Harry said. Already gone, Johnny said. Got a letter this morning from an owl that Dumbledore has been called to London unexpectedly. He set down the coffee cup on the motorcycle's seat and looked at Harry directly. Quirrell will move tonight. Harry processed this. The cold was sharp on his face and the village was waking up around them slowly, smoke from chimneys, the sound of a door opening somewhere down the street. You think he'll go for the stone tonight? I think Voldemort has been waiting for an opportunity, Johnny said. And Dumbledore being absent is the opportunity. He'll go tonight. Then I need to go in tonight, Harry said. Johnny was quiet. Not because I want to, Harry said. Because someone will, and it should be someone who knows what they're dealing with. You're 11, Johnny said. You know that's not actually a relevant fact in this specific conversation, Harry said. Johnny looked at him with the expression he had when Harry was right about something he'd have preferred Harry not be right about. It was a frequent expression. The other two, he said. Granger and Weasley. I'll ask them, Harry said. But they don't have to come. They'll come, Johnny said, with the certainty of someone who had been observing their friendship from a distance for 3 months and understood its structure. That's the kind of people they are. Make sure they know what they're walking into. Always, Harry said. Johnny was quiet for another moment, looking at the castle on the hill with the specific look he had when he was running through variables. I'll be at the school boundary tonight, he said. If you come out the other side wrong, I'll know it. I won't come out the other side wrong, Harry said. I know, Johnny said. But I'll be there anyway. Harry nodded. He looked up at the castle himself, the way it sat on the hill with its towers and its wards and its 1,000 years of accumulated intention, and he thought about what was inside it, what had been sitting in the dark behind that third-floor door for months, patient in the way things without fear were patient. The rider can't come in, Harry said. No. But I have it, Harry said. Not arrogantly, factually. The fire that was in him, that was his own fire and not the rider's but was related to it by something deeper than genetics. He'd been feeling it more clearly since he arrived at Hogwarts, as if the castle's ambient magic was a context in which it made more sense. It'll be enough. Johnny looked at him for a long moment with the expression that was simultaneously the most parental and the most soldier-like of all his expressions, pride and calculation and the specific controlled fear of someone sending someone they love into something dangerous and knowing it's the right call and not liking that it is. Don't show off, Johnny said. Do what needs doing and come back. I know, Harry said. I mean it. More actions. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 5, The Chamber and the Memory. The diary was already gone. That was what Ginny Weasley said, in October of second year, sitting in the corner of the Gryffindor common room with her knees pulled to her chest and her face doing the complicated thing that faces did when they were trying to contain something too big for containment. She'd bought it in Diagon Alley, she said. From a second-hand shop near Borgin and Burke's. She'd been writing in it since September and the diary had been writing back, and then in November it had simply stopped, mid-sentence, mid-thought, gone quiet the way a fire went quiet when someone removed its fuel. Harry sat across from her and listened. Ron was next to him. Hermione was on Ginny's other side, close enough to be a presence without pressing. I don't know what it was, Ginny said. She was 10. She was the youngest of 7 children and she was 10 years old and she had been pouring herself into a book that poured something back and then it had been taken from her and she was grieving it in the specific confused way of someone who knows the thing they're grieving was probably dangerous but it had also been the only thing that felt like it truly listened. It felt like talking to someone who understood. Who actually, she stopped. Someone who made you feel understood, Harry said. She looked at him. Her eyes were red. Yes. That's the most dangerous kind of thing, Harry said. Not harshly, clearly. The things that hurt you most are almost always the ones that started by making you feel seen. Because then you're already inside them before you realize what they are. Ginny was quiet for a moment. Then, was it bad? The diary? It was a piece of Voldemort, Harry said. Her whole body went rigid. A small piece, Harry said. Old. Deliberate. He made it years ago, before everything fell apart. He paused. My dad destroyed it. How do you? He left a note, Harry said. When he took it. He tracked it to Malfoy Manor last summer, before school started. Lucius Malfoy had it. He watched her face process this. He was going to give it to you. That was the plan, get it to a young muggle-born or blood traitor, let it do what it was designed to do. Ginny's expression moved through several things quickly, shock, then a specific cold fury that was unfamiliar on a 10-year-old's face and that Harry recognized as healthy, as exactly the right response. He was going to use me, she said. Yes. He didn't even know me. No, Harry said. You were just the right type of person. The right age, the right family connections, the right amount of vulnerability. He paused. It's not about you specifically. It never was. That's both the worst part and the part that means you can put it down. Ginny looked at him for a long moment. She was very young and she was also not, the way children weren't when something real had happened to them. Can I? She said. Put it down. You can, Harry said. Not immediately. But yes. She nodded once, with the specific decisiveness of someone who has decided to believe something because the alternative is worse and also because they trust the person saying it. Then she uncurled from the corner and looked at Ron, who had been sitting in the careful stillness of an older brother trying not to break the moment by being himself, and said, Don't tell Mum yet. Gin, I'll tell her, Ginny said. I just need a week. To figure out how to say it. She looked at Ron steadily, and something passed between them that was the specific frequency of siblings, something that didn't need language. Please. Ron looked at Harry, who gave him nothing, because this was Ron's call, his family, his sister. Ron looked back at Ginny and said, 1 week. Then I'm telling her myself. Fine, Ginny said. She stood up, shook herself slightly, the way you shook off something that had been sitting on you too long, and walked toward the girls' dormitory with her chin up and her shoulders set. The three of them sat in the common room's warmth and were quiet for a moment. The diary's gone, Ron said. But something's still happening. Yes, Harry said. Because it was. That was the thing about the Chamber of Secrets plot, the diary had been the delivery mechanism, but the chamber was real. The basilisk was real. It had been sleeping in the castle's plumbing for 1,000 years, waiting for an heir of Slytherin to wake it and aim it, and while the diary being gone had disrupted Lucius Malfoy's original plan, the chamber itself was still there and the snake was still alive and Tom Riddle, the memory of Tom Riddle, 16 years old and brilliantly clever and deeply dangerous, had found another way in. Harry had felt it in October. The castle had shown him, the same way it had shown him the passages, that distributed awareness in the stones, something moving in the walls that wasn't pipes and wasn't the natural settling of an ancient building. Something alive and old and patient, tracking the castle's inhabitants through its network of tunnels with a purposefulness that could only be directed. He'd written to Johnny. Johnny had written back in 2 days. Basilisk. I can smell it from the boundary. Ancient, over 1,000 years. Eyes are the primary weapon. Don't look at it directly. The other issue, what's directing it? The diary's gone but something else is opening the chamber. Something in the castle. Find it. Something in the castle. Harry had been looking since he received the letter, running through the writer sense the way you ran a diagnostic, moving through the building at night and listening for the signature. He'd found it in November, just once, a flicker of it, brief, in the 7th floor corridor near a tapestry of trolls doing ballet, and then gone. Whoever or whatever was anchoring Tom Riddle's presence in the school was mobile, or was using a mobile object, and it didn't stay in one place long enough to pin. Then the attack started. Mrs. Norris first, on Halloween. The message on the wall, written in what the castle helpfully registered to Harry's extended awareness as chicken blood rather than human, which was relevant to the question of the basilisk's current directive. Then Colin Creevey, found on the stairs with his camera in front of his face, petrified, the camera's lens melted from the inside, reflected image, not direct gaze. The basilisk had been warned off killing. Someone was controlling it with more restraint than a 1,000-year-old snake would exercise on its own. Someone's using Parseltongue, Harry said to Hermione and Ron, a week after Colin's attack, in the library. To direct it. The basilisk isn't choosing not to kill, it's being instructed. You speak Parseltongue, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. Can you tell it to stop? Harry had thought about this. In theory. But I'd have to find it first, and finding it means being in the same tunnels as a 1,000-year-old snake that can kill with eye contact. He paused. The more pressing question is who's speaking to it. The diary is gone. So what's the current anchor? A Horcrux, Hermione said. Another one. Not confirmed, Harry said. But likely. The signature I keep catching in the 7th floor corridor, the room of requirement, Hermione said immediately. Harry looked at her. I've been researching it, she said, with the mild defensiveness of someone who researches things continuously and is used to having to explain why any given piece of research is relevant. It's in Hogwarts, a history, a room that appears when a person needs it, conceals things people want hidden. If someone hid a Horcrux in the castle, that's where it would be. She paused. But it's also possible someone is using the room to anchor themselves. If there were another diary-type object in there, and someone was making regular use of the room. Someone who knows about the room of requirement, Ron said. Who'd know about it? A student who'd been at Hogwarts long enough to explore it, Harry said. Or a former student. Tom Riddle attended Hogwarts in the 40s, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. He'd know every inch of this building. But he's not, Ron stopped. He's not physically here. No, Harry said. But a piece of him is. He looked at the table for a moment, running it. The diary was one Horcrux. But he made more than one. If there's another object in this school that contains a piece of him, a different piece, a piece old enough to know the room of requirement exists, then that piece could be directing the basilisk, using whoever's accessing the room as a conduit. Hermione and Ron looked at each other. Then we need to find the room, Hermione said. Tonight, Harry said. The room of requirement was on the 7th floor, as Hermione had said, and it appeared on Harry's third pass of the corridor, a door materializing in the wall with the specific materialization of something that existed in a space adjacent to normal space and was choosing to become visible. Harry had not told it what he needed in words because the room didn't seem to require words, and what he needed was simple enough that the castle could probably read it from the ambient pressure of his intent. What's in here that shouldn't be? The door opened onto chaos. The room was enormous, warehouse enormous, the size of a small city block, and it was filled with centuries of accumulated discarded things. Towers of furniture and broken equipment and trunks and crates and objects that had been shoved in here by students and teachers over 1,000 years of Hogwarts history, creating an archaeological record of forgotten things. It smelled of dust and old wood and the particular scent of things that had been kept from the light for very long. Harry closed his eyes. He let the writer sense run through the room the way a hand runs over a surface in the dark, not looking, feeling. The room was enormous and the accumulated objects were a kind of noise, each one carrying traces of who had touched it and what they'd felt and what they'd wanted, and through all of it, there. He opened his eyes and looked at the tower of objects 40 feet to his right and slightly above him, because the towers were tall and things had been stacked on things in a way that created a precarious topography. There was a diadem on a stone bust, near the top, tarnished and specific, Ravenclaw's diadem. He understood from the shape of it, though understanding that was not the same as understanding how it had gotten here or when. The Horcrux signature was unambiguous. Old, settled, patient. This one had been here for decades. He climbed. Harry, Hermione said, behind him, in the tone she used when she wanted to advise against something but had already accepted she wasn't going to stop it. Stay at the entrance, he said. If anything comes in, shout. What are you expecting to come in? Whatever's been using this room, he said. If there's a presence anchored to this object, it's going to know we're here the moment I touch it. He climbed the stacked furniture with the ease of someone who had been climbing things since childhood, motorcycles, workshop shelves, the sides of trucks in Nevada when he was 7 and had decided that altitude was interesting. The towers were unstable in the way of very tall things built without engineering intention, but navigable if you were paying attention to which elements were weight-bearing and which were decorative. The diadem was on a stone bust of an old woman, set there with the deliberate placement of someone who had wanted it hidden but accessible. He picked it up. Cold. Heavy with something more than its physical weight. The voice came immediately. Not from the diadem, from the air, from the room itself, from that distributed presence he'd been tracking through the castle for months. It was young. Measured. Precise in the way that very intelligent people were precise when they'd had years to perfect their presentation. Harry Potter. The voice moved through the room like cold water. I've been waiting to speak to you properly. Harry stood on the tower of discarded furniture with the diadem in his hand and looked at the air where the voice was coming from. Tom, he said. A pause. Something shifted in the quality of the room's light, or the room's shadow, a presence gathering itself. You know who I am. I know what you were, Harry said. 16 years old, Hogwarts student, already building the first of these. He held up the diadem. Hiding pieces of yourself in things that other people valued. Places that other people loved. Leaving yourself in the architecture of a school that made you what you are. I left myself in places I could return to. Because you were afraid, Harry said. Because you'd found the one thing that scared you and you'd built a whole philosophy around not having to face it. The presence sharpened. The temperature dropped several degrees. I am not afraid. You were when you made these, Harry said, the diadem's weight in his palm. You were young and brilliant and terrified of dying and you tore your soul apart to make sure it wouldn't happen. That's not power. That's panic in a very expensive frame. You carry one of my pieces yourself, the voice said, with something cold and satisfied in it. You know what that means. You know what connecting to you felt like, through the years. I have felt your training. I have felt your father's fire through you. A pause. The Ghost Rider's host raised the boy who lived. I must admit that even I did not predict that. No, Harry said. You predicted a frightened orphan. You got something else. What I got, Riddle said, was a child who has been prepared for war his entire life, who understands exactly what he carries, who has been trained by the one entity in this world specifically designed to destroy me. The voice was moving now, circling. And yet here you are. Still carrying the shard. Still unable to resolve the central problem. For all your preparation, for all your father's fire, the one Horcrux he cannot destroy is still inside you. We're working on it, Harry said. You've been working on it for 11 years. The voice moved closer. What if there is no solution? What if the only way to destroy that shard is to destroy the vessel it's in? Your father knows this. Your precious Dumbledore knows this. They have been building toward that answer and away from it simultaneously, because neither of them can face what it requires. Harry was quiet. Around him the tower creaked in an absence of wind. I'll deal with that when we get to it, he said. Will you? The voice had stopped moving. It was right in front of him now, the presence of a 16-year-old memory with 50 years of solitude and a basilisk for company. Do you know why I made the Horcruxes, Harry? Not the theory. The feeling. What it was like to be me at 16 in this school. Tell me, Harry said. Not because he needed to know. Because the writer had taught him, if something needs to tell you something, let it. A thing speaking is a thing not moving. I was extraordinary, Riddle said. In every measurable way. Exceptional. I could do things at 16 that most wizards cannot do at 60. I had read everything this library contained that was worth reading. I could have been, a pause. I could have been anything. And I was nobody. An orphan. A half-blood who didn't know his father, raised in a Muggle institution, come to this school with nothing but what I was. Another pause, and in the pause was something that was not quite the coldness it was pretending to be. The world was not going to give me what I deserved. So I was going to take it. And I was not going to die before I had it. You traded who you were for the guarantee that you wouldn't die before you got it, Harry said. And the trading cost you the thing that made you worth being. So by the time you had it, you were no one. Silence. You're brilliant, Harry said. I'm not being condescending, you genuinely are. The magic you devised, the spells, the Horcrux methodology, brilliant. And you aimed all of it at the wrong problem. Because the problem was never that you were going to die. The problem was that you didn't believe you were enough without being invincible. The presence was very still now. The temperature of the room had stabilized in the way that things stabilized right before a significant change. You are 11 years old, Riddle said. 12, Harry said. And you're a memory in a hat, and I'm holding the only thing keeping you coherent in this building. A pause. Then, don't. I'm going to, Harry said. And I need you to know why. Not because you're evil, not only because of that. Because this is what you wanted, actually. When you were 16. When you were brilliant and frightened in this school and you were trying to make something of yourself that couldn't be taken. You wanted to matter. You wanted to be permanent. He held the diadem steady. This isn't permanent. This is a fragment. A copy. A piece of a person who never got to be the person he could have been. I'm not destroying something great. I'm releasing something trapped. The voice said nothing. Harry brought the fire up. It wasn't the writer's fire, it was his own, the clean specific heat of it, the kind that burned what needed burning and left what didn't. He'd practiced this. He'd been practicing it for years, since the first time Johnny had sat him down in the workshop and said you have your own fire, separate from mine, and you need to understand what it is before it becomes a liability. He understood what it was now. It was Lily's fire, in part, the fire of the sacrifice, the protection, the love that had been strong enough to redirect a killing curse. It was James's fire too, the bright specific courage of someone who stood between the things he loved and the things that threatened them without hesitating. It was his own. All three, combined into something that was specific to Harry Potter and nothing else. The diadem melted. Not catastrophically, cleanly, the way things melted when the heat was calibrated right, becoming something else rather than simply ceasing to be. The scream that came from it was the same frequency he'd heard from the others, that below-sound frequency, the soul piece unmaking, and beneath that, just for a moment, something else. Not a scream. Something more like a sigh. Something that sounded, briefly, like relief. The room was quiet. Harry climbed down from the Tower of Forgotten Things and stood on the Room of Requirements floor, and Hermione was in the doorway with her wand lit and her eyes wide, and Ron was behind her with his hand on his wand, and the room's extraordinary clutter surrounded them in silence. Was that, Ron started. Yes, Harry said. You talked to him, Hermione said. Not accusing. Trying to understand. He needed to say something, Harry said. And I needed him not to be moving while he said it. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the space where the diadem had been. What did he say? That he was afraid, Harry said. Mostly. Hermione looked at him with those sharp eyes that had gotten sharper over 14 months of knowing Harry. Did you feel sorry for him? A little, Harry said. For what he could have been. Not for what he chose to become. He started toward the door. Come on. It's nearly 3. We need to get back before Filch does his round. Harry, Hermione said, and he stopped. She was looking at him with an expression that was trying to be clinical and wasn't quite. The things he said. About your scar. About the problem. It's the same problem it's always been, Harry said. But he said, I know what he said, Harry said. And I know Dumbledore is working on it, and Johnny is working on it, and I'll find the answer or I'll find it myself. He met her eyes steadily. I'm not going to spend whatever time we have between now and then being afraid of it. That's not how this works. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her filing things, filing the problem and the insufficient data and the trust and the uncertainty, sorting them into the categories they belonged to. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Good, Ron said, from behind her, with the specific emphasis of someone who had been listening and had decided that this counted as resolved. Can we leave now? This room smells like my grandmother's attic and that's not a compliment. The chamber itself wasn't discovered until February. Not because Harry hadn't been looking, he had, running the Parseltongue sense through the castle the way you ran a finger along a tuning fork, listening for the resonant frequency of a basilisk's presence in stone. But the basilisk had gone quiet after the diadem. Whatever had been directing it through the diadem's anchor had lost its coherence, and the snake had retreated into its deep tunnels and stayed there, and Harry had let it for a while because a quiescent basilisk was manageable in a way that an actively directed basilisk wasn't. Then Justin Finch-Fletchley was petrified in March. Harry heard about it at breakfast from the cascade of noise that ran through the great hall when bad news arrived, and looked at Hermione across the table and said, "It's found another anchor." What? Ron said, through toast. The basilisk. Something's directing it again. He stood up. Someone found another object. Or made one. Hermione was already running through it. The diary was Lucius Malfoy's original plan, she said. But if Malfoy had a backup, if he gave something else to someone else, someone in the school, someone who didn't know what it was, Ginny, Ron said. They looked at each other. The shop where Ginny bought the diary, Harry said. She said it was a second-hand shop near Borgin and Burke's. What if there was something else there? What if Malfoy planted more than one object? They found it by tracing Ginny's steps through the term with the particular attention of people who'd been paying attention all year. She hadn't noticed anything else, she said, when Harry asked her carefully on a Tuesday evening in the common room. Nothing else from the shop. But her cauldron had been repaired at the beginning of term, sent to the school supplier, and it had come back with a small crack in the base that she'd sealed with a standard reparo, and the seal had an odd quality to it that she'd ignored because it was just a seal. Harry asked to see the cauldron. She brought it. He held it for a moment, turned it over, felt the base. Not a Horcrux. But a portkey, he thought, a connection, a line running from the object in his hands to somewhere else, somewhere old and deep in the castle's plumbing. Someone had used the repaired cauldron as a relay. A targeting mechanism. Who repaired it, he asked. The school supplier, Ginny said. Madame Pringles, in Hogsmeade. She said the school account covered it, it's standard for first years. Was it Madame Pringle herself? Ginny thought about it. No, she said slowly. It was a man. She said he was a new assistant. Harry set the cauldron down. What did he look like? Ginny described him. The description was general, middle-aged, nondescript, careful hands, but the piece that mattered wasn't the physical description. It was this: he'd asked her which year she was in and which house and had been specifically interested when she mentioned her family. He knew your name, Harry said. I think so, yes, Ginny said. Harry looked at Hermione and Ron. Someone placed a relay in the cauldron while it was being repaired. Someone who knew which first-year Weasley girl was coming to Hogwarts this year. Someone connected to the original plan. A Malfoy contact, Hermione said. A Death Eater contact, Harry said. Or a former one. Someone who had the knowledge and the access and the reason. He paused. The relay is active. Which means the basilisk has been receiving a directed signal through the cauldron every time Ginny uses it. Ginny had gone very still. Every time I use my cauldron, she said slowly. The snake knows. Where I am, who's near me. It's not targeting you, Harry said. It's using your proximity to map the castle. Finding vulnerable targets, muggleborns and half-bloods who don't know what to be careful of. He picked up the cauldron again. This needs to be destroyed. Won't that just break the relay? Hermione said. The basilisk will still be in the tunnels. Yes, Harry said. Which means we need to deal with the basilisk. He looked at the cauldron. But breaking the relay first means it stops targeting. Buys us time to find the chamber entrance. I'll talk to Dumbledore, Hermione said. No, Harry said. She looked at him. I mean, yes, Dumbledore needs to know, Harry said. But I need to find the chamber first. If I tell Dumbledore now, he'll want to manage the response. And the right response here isn't managed. Hermione's expression was the complex one she had when she disagreed with Harry's reasoning but could follow the logic of it. You're going to talk to the basilisk, she said. Yes. In Parseltongue. Yes. 1,000-year-old snake that's been used as a weapon for the last 6 months. I'm not asking it nicely, Harry said. I'm telling it that the thing directing it is gone and that it needs to go back to sleep. And if it doesn't agree? Then we escalate, Harry said. The chamber entrance was in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, which Harry located in 3 days by the simple method of running the Parseltongue sense along the castle's plumbing and finding the place where the vibration was loudest and most coherent. Myrtle herself was in the bathroom when Harry came in to check it, and she had the particular energy of someone perpetually available for dramatic interaction who had been waiting for the right audience. She had, it turned out, seen the entrance open before. A boy, she said. Years ago. Tall, dark, handsome. He'd looked at her and she'd died, which had been traumatic, but also, she acknowledged with the specific self-awareness of someone who'd had decades to process it, had given her the longest sustained existence she could have had under the circumstances. He opened a tap, she said, indicating one of the old sink fixtures. The snake won. He hissed at it. Harry looked at the sink. The tap was old bronze, the handle worn smooth, a small snake worked into the metal. He hissed at it in Parseltongue, not open, exactly, more like the concept of yielding, of a passage becoming clear, and the sink slid aside and the entrance opened, dropping down into cold dark. He went alone. He'd told Hermione and Ron he was going alone. Hermione had argued this comprehensively and with references. Ron had said, "I hate this," which was his version of accepting it. Harry had told them both that if he wasn't back in 2 hours, then they told Dumbledore everything, and he meant it, because 2 hours was enough time for anything that could be resolved to be resolved and anything that couldn't to have moved past the point where he'd want them to see it. The tunnel was long and cold and sloped downward in a way that suggested the chamber was deep in the castle's foundations, below even the dungeons. The walls were carved stone, old, much older than the parts of the castle Harry had been in. This was Salazar Slytherin's original work, built in the 10th century, and it had the specific quality of things built by someone who wanted to last. Snake motifs in the walls, picked out in the torchlight that appeared as Harry moved, the castle responding to his presence even down here. He moved quickly because speed was intelligence in the dark. The chamber proper was vast. The ceiling was lost in shadow above multiple pillars carved with interlocking serpents, and at the far end was the statue of Slytherin, enormous, ancient, the face weathered but the expression still legible, someone who had been very sure of himself and wanted the architecture to reflect that. The torches that ran the length of the chamber lit as Harry walked in, and the air was cold and damp with the underground water that fed the castle's plumbing. The basilisk was coiled at the base of the statue. It was the largest living thing Harry had ever been near. It was 60 feet long and its scales were a deep dark green-black and its body was as thick as a tree trunk, and it was looking at him with eyes that he kept carefully out of his direct line of sight, watching it through peripheral vision and reflected surface. The water on the floor made an adequate mirror. He stopped in the middle of the chamber, a reasonable distance from the basilisk, and spoke to it in Parseltongue. He told it the one directing it was gone. The piece in the tower, the anchor, gone. The direction it had been receiving was finished, cancelled, burned. He spoke clearly and without inflection, the way you spoke to something very old and very powerful that hadn't made the choice to be used as a weapon and might, if communicated with correctly, prefer not to continue being one. The basilisk's head came up. Its vast coils shifted. The sound it made was felt more than heard, a subsonic vibration that ran up through the stone floor. It said, in Parseltongue, something that translated approximately as, "The voice is gone." "Yes," Harry said. "It won't return." The head turned toward him, and Harry kept his eyes precisely sideways, on the reflection in the floor's standing water, watching the enormous triangular head tracking him. "There was a boy before," it said. "Young. Gave me direction. Made me useful again. He's gone too," Harry said. "His master remains." It was a statement, not a question. The basilisk was old enough to feel the shape of the magical world, the way very old creatures did, not specifics but patterns, resonances. "His master is diminished," Harry said. "And becoming more so." "You diminish him." "Yes." A long pause. The basilisk's coils shifted again, the movement of something immense reassessing its position. "What do you want from me, speaker?" "Sleep," Harry said. "Go back to sleep. This war isn't yours. You were put here as a weapon by someone who's been gone for 1,000 years, and the people trying to use you now are using you for a war that has nothing to do with what you are." The basilisk was still for a long moment. Then, "The last speaker who came here did not give me a choice." "I'm giving you one," Harry said. "That's different." Another long pause. The water in the chamber made small sounds. The torches threw moving shadows across the serpent pillars, and the statue of Slytherin loomed at the far end with its weathered certainty, and the basilisk coiled at its base with its ancient weight and its ancient patience, and Harry stood in the middle of it all and waited. "If the last voice returns," the basilisk said finally. "I'll deal with it," Harry said. The head came down slowly, the vast body resettling, coils drawing in. It curled into itself with the unhurried movement of something that had been woken up too many times and had decided that the current offer was the best one it was going to get. "Then I sleep," it said. "Speaker." "Thank you," Harry said. He was almost to the tunnel entrance when the basilisk spoke again, just once, the voice coming from the far end of the chamber in a tone that was different from its previous statements, older, quieter, something under it that was hard to name. "The one in your forehead," it said. Harry stopped. "I felt it. When you spoke. It does not want to sleep." "I know," Harry said. "It fears you," the basilisk said. "It has feared you since you were small. Everything it feels, everything its master feels, it comes to you. But the fear most of all." Harry stood in the tunnel entrance with the chamber behind him. "Good," he said, in English, because there was no Parseltongue word for what he meant. He climbed out of the entrance and Myrtle was still there, floating near the sink, and she looked at him with the specific attention of someone who had been waiting to see how something turned out. "Well," she said. "It's fine," Harry said. "Did you speak to it?" "Yes." "What did it say?" "We worked something out," Harry said, and washed his hands in the sink, and went back to find Hermione and Ron. He told Dumbledore that evening. Not everything, not the basilisk's last words, which were his to keep, but the chamber, the relay in the cauldron, the intermediary in Hogsmeade who had serviced the original plan after the diary was gone. He told it concisely, standing in Dumbledore's office while Dumbledore sat behind his desk and listened with the full and undivided attention he gave to things that warranted it. When Harry was done, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Fawkes shifted on his perch. The office was full of the soft sounds of moving instruments. "The basilisk," Dumbledore said. "You spoke to it." "Yes." "And it agreed to sleep," Harry said. "For now. As long as the direction stops." "The direction will stop," Dumbledore said. "I'll find the man in Hogsmeade. The network Lucius Malfoy was operating, it's been running on contingency plans for a year. It ends." He paused. "I owe you an apology, Harry." Harry waited. "I should have addressed the basilisk years ago," Dumbledore said. "I knew the chamber existed. I knew Slytherin's legacy in the school's architecture. I chose not to address it directly, because I thought the conditions for its use were sufficiently restricted, and I was wrong." He met Harry's eyes clearly. "I am sometimes wrong. I try to acknowledge it when I am." "I know," Harry said. "You don't seem surprised." "Smart people are wrong sometimes," Harry said. "It doesn't change that they're smart. It just means smart isn't enough on its own." He paused. "You need the honesty to go with it." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with those blue eyes that were always doing more than they showed. "You sound like someone who has thought about this specifically," he said. "I was raised by someone who has thought about it specifically," Harry said. "How is Mr. Blaise?" Dumbledore asked. The question was genuine, not just polite framing. "Working," Harry said. "He's been in Switzerland for 2 weeks. Something underground." "The cup," Dumbledore said. "He said you told him about the secondary ward." "I did," Dumbledore said. "I've been thinking about that vault for years. There are ways through the secondary ward. It responds to non-human supernatural entities, but a human wielding borrowed fire might read differently to it." He paused. "Tell him, the ward has a gap in its response cycle. 3 minutes in every 47. When the ward resets, it's briefly blind." Harry filed this. "I'll tell him." "Tell him also," Dumbledore stopped, and something moved in his expression, a decision being made. "Tell him that I believe I have found something. In my research. Relevant to the problem we discussed last year." "The shard," Harry said. "Yes." Dumbledore's voice was careful. "I am not yet ready to present it as a solution. There are gaps still. But the direction is, I believe the direction is right." He looked at Harry steadily, and in his look was the weight of what he was carrying, the years of this war, the decisions he'd made, the plan he'd built around a version of Harry that hadn't arrived, and underneath the weight, something that was not guilt exactly but was its first cousin. "I will not make a decision about this without you. As we agreed." "Good," Harry said. He went back to the dormitory. Ron was pretending to be asleep and fooling no one. Hermione had left a note on his pillow in her neat handwriting, "All well. H.G." He wrote yes underneath it and set it on his desk for the morning. He lay in the dark and thought about a 16-year-old boy, brilliant and frightened, building anchors in the things other people loved. He thought about the basilisk at the bottom of the castle, coiled in its old chamber, sleeping now, left alone at last. He thought about the shard in his forehead, which feared him, which the basilisk had felt and named. He thought about fear. About how the whole architecture of Voldemort's existence had been built around not being afraid of dying, and the irony was that the construction itself had been the most afraid thing he'd ever done. He thought about what Dumbledore had found. The direction that was right. "We'll deal with it when we get there." He slept, and the castle settled around him, and the lake was dark outside the windows, and on the boundary somewhere Johnny Blaze had come back from Switzerland with burns on his hands and the rider's satisfaction in his bones, and the cup was ash, and the road was forward, And there was one Horcrux left in a fixed location and one shard in a skull and one snake in the dark and one terrified diminished fragment of the most dangerous man in a century, and the count was going down. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The letter arrived in July, the summer between second and third year, and it was not from Dumbledore. It was from Johnny, written on the back of a petrol station receipt in his particular shorthand, which Harry had been reading for as long as he'd been able to read anything. Come home. We need to talk. Bring nothing you don't need. The answer's here. Harry packed in 8 minutes. He'd been at the Burrow for 3 weeks. Molly Weasley had extended the invitation in June with the warmth of someone who had decided Harry was an unofficial Weasley for all practical purposes, and Harry had accepted with genuine gratitude, because the Burrow was the first place outside of whatever accommodation he and Johnny were in at any given time that felt like a place people actually lived rather than a place people happened to be. It was chaotic and warm and the food was extraordinary, and Ron's brothers moved through it like a benign weather system. Ron appeared in the doorway of their shared room as Harry was folding his last shirt. "You're leaving," Ron said. "Yes. Dad needs me." Ron looked at the receipt in Harry's hand, the shorthand he'd never been able to fully decode. "Is it bad?" "No," Harry said. "He says he has an answer." Ron was quiet for a moment. He understood what an answer meant in the context of Harry's situation. They'd talked about it, over the year, with the specificity that came from two friends who trusted each other enough to discuss the things that didn't have clean resolutions. Ron's approach to the impossible had always been the same: acknowledge it, then look for the move. It was what made him a good chess player and a good friend. "Will you be back?" Ron asked. "Before term?" "Yes," Harry said. "Right when you get there." "I will." "Harry," Ron said, and stopped. Harry looked at him. "Whatever the answer is," Ron said, carefully, in the tone of someone saying something they've been holding for a while, "I want you to know that the people on this side of it, me, Hermione, my family, we're not going anywhere regardless of what it requires. All right? That's a fact, not a thing I need you to respond to." Harry held his eyes for a moment, and felt the weight of that the way you felt the weight of something load-bearing. "I know," he said. "Good," Ron said, and stepped back from the doorway. "Send Athena when you get there." Harry sent his owl ahead, dropped his bag into the truck bed outside the Burrow, and drove north into the July morning. The Welsh farmhouse looked the same as it always looked: low stone, workshop out back, the moor beyond stretching to the horizon in its perpetual grey-green way, the sky above it enormous and clean. The motorcycle was in the driveway, which meant Johnny was here and had been here, not just passing through. He was in the workshop when Harry came in, sitting on the work stool with his hands around a coffee cup and the look on his face that Harry associated with having been awake for a very long time thinking about a single specific problem. The workshop smelled of oil and metal and the faintest trace of the writer's fire, and the back wall had papers pinned to it, not many, but carefully chosen, connected with lines in pencil that Harry recognized as Johnny's working methodology: start with what you know, connect outward, don't speculate past the evidence. Johnny looked up when Harry came in. He looked tired, the specific tired of someone who had been running very hard and had stopped, and the lines around his eyes were deeper than they'd been at Christmas. But there was something underneath the tiredness, a quality of certainty, of having arrived at a destination after a long journey, that Harry had learned to read as distinct from exhaustion. "You drove," Johnny said. "Left at 7, Harry said. "Good roads." "Sit down." Harry sat on the old wooden chair by the workbench. He looked at the papers on the wall without trying to read them yet, giving Johnny the sequence. "The cup is gone," Johnny said. "That's confirmed, you know that from the letter." "March," Harry said. "Switzerland." "The ring was gone from 84. The locket, 88. The snake, Nagini, I've located her." He paused. "She's with what's left of Voldemort, in a farmhouse in Albania. He's been there since 81, basically. Building enough strength to move." He looked at his coffee. "I can get to the snake." The wards around the farmhouse are specific to human magical intrusion, they don't account for me. I can have the snake done in a week. The diadem is already gone, Harry said. Last November. I know. Dumbledore told me. He looked at Harry. You burned it yourself. Yes. Good, Johnny said, simply. Then he stood up and turned to the wall and put his hand on one of the papers, and Harry saw that the paper had a diagram on it, not a spell diagram, not a ward configuration, but something that looked like the logic structure he used when he was working through a particularly complex problem and needed the external architecture to hold the pieces while he moved between them. Dumbledore has been working on this for 2 years, Johnny said. Since the night in the hospital wing. He wrote to me in December with a framework, I've been filling it in since. He looked at the diagram. The problem is the shard. The 7th Horcrux, the one in your scar. It's not attached to an object. It's attached to you. To your living tissue, your magical signature, the way your magic developed around it since you were 15 months old. It's not a parasite anymore, it's been integrated. Part of your magical architecture. Harry looked at the diagram. Which means it can't be burned out, he said. Like the others. Which means it can't be burned out like the others, Johnny confirmed. The writer has known this since Godric's Hollow. Every time I've pushed the question, it shows me the same image. He paused. A door. Harry was quiet. Death, Johnny said. Not final death. Not a door that closes. A door that opens both ways. He turned from the wall and looked at Harry directly, with the full weight of everything he was. Dumbledore's research says the same thing. The shard in your scar is attached to you, not the other way around. It can't survive your death. But death isn't necessarily permanent. You can survive death, Harry said slowly. Under specific conditions. With specific protection. Johnny's voice was flat and careful, the voice he used when he was saying something he needed to say exactly right. The protection your mother put into you when she died, it's still there. It didn't expire. It's not tied to the blood wards or the blood protection the way Dumbledore originally thought. It's tied to you. To what you are. He paused. The writer believes, and Dumbledore's research supports, that if you die, the shard in your scar will die with you, because it's anchored to your living state. And the protection your mother gave you means the door goes both ways. I can come back, Harry said. Yes. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, the moor was doing its moor things in the July morning, the wind moving through the heather, the sky huge and unhurried above it. Harry sat in the old wooden chair and turned this over with the methodical care of someone applying honest thought to an enormous fact. You're sure, he said. The writer is sure, Johnny said. Which is more than sure. The writer has been in proximity to death's architecture for 30 years. If it says the door goes both ways, it goes both ways. And Dumbledore. Dumbledore says there's a mechanism in old protective magic, specifically in the kind of sacrifice your mother made, that creates a tether. Not to life, specifically. To the intent behind the sacrifice. The intent was permanent. Which means the tether is permanent. He paused. He says he should have seen it sooner. He said to tell you that. Harry almost smiled. He's getting better at the apology thing. He's had practice, Johnny said. Harry looked at the diagram on the wall again. The logic structure, the connected pieces. He traced the lines with his eyes, from the shard, to the conditions, to the door, to the tether, to what was on the other side of the door. Everything connected. Everything pointing at the same resolution. The snake first, he said. Yes, Johnny said. The snake first. That's my job. I leave tomorrow. He looked at Harry. After the snake, the only thing left is the shard in your scar and whatever remains of Voldemort himself. He held Harry's gaze steadily. And those two things are connected. When the shard dies in you, the last anchor goes. He won't have anything left to hold him. No more pieces spread through the world, no more hooks in reality. Just what's left of him, which is very little. How little? Harry said. Less than a person, Johnny said. More than a ghost. Something that's been maintaining itself through force of will and borrowed magic for 12 years, growing slowly, trying to rebuild something it already spent. He paused. He'll come back to Britain. Probably next year. He'll need a human anchor to reconstitute himself, someone willing, or someone he can compel. He'll come for you, because the prophecy is the only fixed point left in his understanding of the world. Let him, Harry said. Johnny looked at him. I mean it, Harry said. We don't need to find him. We don't need to chase him across Europe. We let him come. We let him rebuild enough to arrive. And when he arrives to something he's not expecting. He held Johnny's eyes. We've been reducing him for 12 years. By the time he gets here, the only piece of him that will be anywhere in the world is the piece inside me. And I know how to deal with that piece. You'll have to die, Johnny said. Flat. Direct. Saying the word the way it needed to be said. Briefly, Harry said. There is no brief about it, Harry, Johnny said, and the tiredness in his face sharpened into something more raw, the specific rawness of someone who had been sitting with this fact for months and had not gotten less raw about it regardless of how reasonable the logic was. There is no brief. There is going through that door and the writer's certainty that it opens both ways and the evidence of your mother's protection, and those are good things to have, but I have to, he stopped. You have to watch it happen, Harry said. Yes. And you can't come into the school. No. Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at his father, the man who had found him in a ruined house and ridden into the night and raised him on the road and made him coffee when he was 9 and told him the truth when it would have been easier not to, and been there at every boundary, every wall, every place where the wards stopped and Johnny Blaze had to stand outside and wait, and felt the weight of that, the specific weight of what it cost a person to love something they couldn't always protect. I need you to hear me, Harry said. Johnny looked at him. I'm not afraid, Harry said. Not performatively. Not as a statement for an audience. Just a fact, delivered with the clarity of something that had been true for a long time and had been examined from every angle and remained true regardless. I have never been afraid of this. You made sure of that. Not by telling me not to be afraid, by giving me a life where I understood what things were worth being afraid of, and this isn't one of them. He paused. Dying to destroy the last piece of the worst thing in a generation, with a door that opens both ways and my mother's protection as a tether, that's not something to be afraid of. That's a problem with a solution. Johnny was quiet for a long time. The workshop breathed around them. Your mother said something like that, he said finally. About not being afraid. James told me, once. He looked at his coffee cup. She said that the only things worth genuine fear were the things that made you less yourself. That dying didn't make you less yourself, it just moved you from one state to another. What made you less yourself was choosing wrong when the choice cost you something. Harry was quiet for a moment. She sounds like someone I'd have liked. You'd have loved each other, Johnny said. You have the same way of looking at a problem, straight at it, no sideways, no softening. He set the coffee cup down. She'd be furious at me right now, for the record. For telling me the plan. For not figuring it out sooner, Johnny said. She'd say I should have had this sorted in the first 2 years and I've been running around burning things when I should have been reading. Harry smiled, a real one, the full version, the one that came out when something was genuinely funny rather than just worth acknowledging. You found it though, he said. Dumbledore found it. I confirmed it. Together, then. Together, Johnny said. They sat in the workshop in the July morning, father and son, the papers on the wall with their careful logic, the more beyond the door doing its patient gray-green thing, and the problem that had been at the center of their world for 12 years sitting between them, finally small enough to see all of. "Tomorrow you leave for Albania," Harry said. "Yes. And when you come back?" "We wait," Johnny said. "We go back to Wales. You go back to Hogwarts in September. You live your life and you do your year and we wait for him to come." He paused. "It might not be this year. It might be 2 years. 3. But he comes," Harry said. "He comes," Johnny said. "He always does." Third year passed in the specific way of a year that is a pause before something, a year that knew it was an interlude. Harry went back to Hogwarts in September with the answer in his pocket, metaphorically, and moved through the year with the settled quality of someone who has been told the shape of the ending and can therefore pay attention to the journey rather than spending energy on dread. It was a good year, in many ways. Professor Lupin arrived to teach defense against the dark arts and turned out to be the best teacher Harry had encountered at Hogwarts, the kind of teacher who taught from genuine understanding rather than authority, who respected student intelligence enough to explain the reasoning behind the techniques rather than just the techniques themselves. He had James's eyes, in some metaphorical sense, not literally, but the quality of looking at Harry and seeing Harry rather than the symbol. He'd known James. Harry knew this by the third lesson, by the specific quality of attention Lupin gave him, the recognition beneath the professional warmth. He didn't press it, but in October, after a particularly good defense session, Lupin had kept him back and asked, simply, "How are you?" Not "How are you doing in school" or "How are you adjusting?" Just "How are you?" "Good," Harry said. And then, because it was Lupin and Lupin deserved more, better than expected. "I have what I need." Lupin had looked at him for a moment with something that was composed of several emotions running alongside each other. "Johnny told me," he said quietly. "About the answer. I saw him in August. He thought I should know." He paused. "I told him I thought you'd be all right." "Were you right?" Harry asked. "Completely," Lupin said. They had a working relationship after that. Not the specific friendship of Harry's friendship with Ron and Hermione, which had its own particular weight and texture, but something adjacent, a shared understanding of the stakes, a shared knowledge of who the people in this story were and what they'd been. Sirius Black escaped Azkaban in October, and the wizarding world went into its specific variety of collective panic about it, and Harry watched the reaction with the calm of someone who had been told the relevant facts about Sirius Black by Johnny, who had known him and had very strong opinions. Sirius was innocent, Johnny had told him, the previous summer, during one of their evenings in the farmhouse. He was framed by Peter Pettigrew, who was James and Lily's secret keeper, not Sirius. Pettigrew faked his own death and has been hiding as a rat ever since. Sirius has been in Azkaban for 12 years for a crime he didn't commit. "You're sure," Harry had said. "The writer can feel the truth of a person," Johnny said. "It's not infallible, it's not a lie detector. But guilt has a specific signature, and innocence has a different one. I visited Azkaban once, years ago, for unrelated reasons, and I passed Sirius's cell, and what I felt wasn't guilt." He paused. It was grief. Pure grief. The kind you feel when you've lost everything, not when you've done something terrible. Harry had filed it and held it, and when the news came of the escape he'd gone to Lupin and said, simply, "He's innocent." Lupin had looked at him with the expression of someone who had been carrying a truth for a long time and was exhausted by the weight of it. "Yes," he said. "He is. Then when he comes here, and he'll come here, because he escaped for a reason and the reason is in this school, I need you to be ready to help him." "What makes you think he'll come to the school?" Lupin said. "Because Pettigrew is here," Harry said. Lupin went very still. "Ron's rat," Harry said. "Scabbers. I've been looking at that rat for 2 years and something about it has always been wrong, and it wasn't until I had the full story from Johnny that I understood what. The rat is Pettigrew. He's been living as a rat in the Weasley family for 12 years, waiting." He paused. waiting for Voldemort to be strong enough to need him again. Lupin sat down in his desk chair and was quiet for a long time. The defense classroom was empty around them, the afternoon light making long squares on the stone floor. "You've known since August," Lupin said. "Since August," Harry said. "And you haven't told Ron?" "Not yet," Harry said. "Because if I tell Ron, Ron tells his family, and then it gets managed in a way that doesn't serve the full purpose." He held Lupin's eyes. "Pettigrew running free is evidence that Sirius is innocent. Pettigrew caught is the proof. If he runs again before we have him properly, we lose the ability to clear Sirius through the right channels." Lupin looked at him for a moment. "You are 12 years old," he said. 13, Harry said. "And that's been happening a lot." "Your father's child," Lupin said, not quite under his breath. "Both of them," Harry said. Sirius arrived in December, thin and hollow-eyed and burning with the specific fury of someone who had survived something unsurvivable through the force of a single sustained purpose. He came through a 7th-floor window that the castle seemed to open for him, in the middle of the night, and Harry was there because the castle had told him, the way it had been telling him things for 2 years. He was sitting on the windowsill when Sirius came through it, and Sirius stopped dead on the landing and stared at him with those sunken eyes, and Harry looked back at him with his father's hair and his mother's eyes and his own particular steadiness, and said, "Hello, Sirius." Sirius sat down on the floor and put his face in his hands. Harry let him. He waited, with the patience he'd learned from years of living with someone who understood that certain things needed time before they needed action. "He told you," Sirius said, from behind his hands. "Johnny." "Yes," Harry said. "Everything?" "Enough," Harry said. Sirius lowered his hands. He looked terrible and he looked real, fully present in a way that 12 years of Azkaban would try to strip from a person and hadn't quite managed. His eyes were sunken but they were there, the intelligence in them intact even through the damage. "I should have been the one to find you," he said. "In Godric's Hollow. I went there, I got there after Johnny. He was already gone." "I know," Harry said. "He told me." "He was right to take you," Sirius said. I was in no state. Not that night or for a long time after." Something moved in his face. "I'm sorry." "For not, you were in prison," Harry said. "I was going to chase Pettigrew that night instead of making sure you were, Sirius," Harry said. "You didn't know you were going to prison. You thought you were going to get the man who betrayed my parents. That's the right call." He paused. "You just didn't get to finish it. We'll finish it now." Sirius looked at him with an expression that was moving through several things simultaneously, grief and relief and the specific complex feeling of being told something was all right by the person you most owed the apology to. "You're not angry," he said. "Not at you," Harry said. "At who?" "Pettigrew," Harry said. "And Voldemort. In that order. But I've had a long time to sort out who deserves what." Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that started as something else and came out as a laugh, broken at the edges, not entirely recovered, but real. "James would have liked you enormously," he said. "So I've been told," Harry said. They found Pettigrew together, Harry, Sirius, and Lupin, in the shrieking shack at the end of a chain of events that moved fast once it was in motion, Ron following Harry following a half-glimpsed shape on the Marauders map that Lupin had given him access to when he understood that Harry was using it more intelligently than most adult wizards would. Ron's expression when he understood what Scabbers was had been the expression of a person discovering that a betrayal had been running silently in the background of their family life for 12 years, and Harry had stayed close to him through it because some things required presence rather than distance. Pettigrew was small in person. Small and gray and frightened with the fear of someone who has been running for so long that the catching up felt almost like relief even while the self-preservation reflex kept him moving, kept him talking, kept him trying angles that had long since closed. He talked directly to Harry, when cornered, with the specific strategy of someone trying to invoke a connection. "Your father," he started. Chose you as secret keeper and you gave him to Voldemort, Harry said. That's the relevant summary. He looked at Pettigrew with those clear green eyes, and Pettigrew looked back and saw something that made him stop talking, because what Harry's expression communicated was not anger, it was the simple clean certainty of a verdict already reached. You're going to go to Dumbledore. Tonight. You're going to tell him what you did and you're going to tell it truthfully. The writer knows when people lie, and the writer is connected to me, and I'll know if you don't. This was not entirely accurate in a technical sense, but it was accurate enough in a functional sense, and Pettigrew went to Dumbledore that night, small and grey and cornered, and the world shifted accordingly. Sirius Black was a free man by March. The summer before fourth year, Johnny came back from Albania with ash on his boots and satisfaction in the writer's banked fire, and they sat in a farmhouse kitchen and Harry made dinner because Johnny's cooking got worse when he was tired, and they ate in the comfortable silence of arrived at things. Nagini, Harry said. Gone, Johnny said. How long did it take? The snake was fast, Johnny said. The wards around Voldemort's position were the longer problem. 3 days working through them. He drank his coffee. He felt it when the snake went. I was close enough to feel him feel it. What did it feel like? Harry asked. Johnny was quiet for a moment, considering how to translate it. Like watching someone discover they're alone in a way they've never been alone before, he said. Like the sound the last support makes when the thing it's been holding goes down. He paused. He screamed. Not with a voice. With whatever's left of him. Harry ate his dinner and thought about this. Outside, the moor was in its late July best, actually warm, the heather blooming, the sky clean and deep. He'll come this year, he said. Yes, Johnny said. My guess is the Triwizard Tournament. Harry looked at him. It's been announced, Johnny said. Hogwarts is hosting. The Triwizard Tournament hasn't run in a century, it brings 3 schools together, thousands of people, enormous amounts of magical activity and disruption and opportunity for things to slip through unnoticed. He paused. If I were Voldemort and I had one play left and I needed a large magical event with a guaranteed central participant, the tournament, Harry said. He'll use the tournament to get to me. He'll use it to complete his resurrection, Johnny said. He needs a body. A proper one. He's been half-formed since 81 and he's had 12 years to work out exactly what he needs to reconstitute himself fully, and what he needs involves blood. He looked at Harry directly. Your blood. The same way your mother's sacrifice created a protection, your blood in a specific ritual context can anchor a resurrection. He knows this. He's been building toward it. Then let him build toward it, Harry said. Because the resurrection is the end of the line. If he resurrects himself, he's finally a fixed point. Not a collection of pieces spread through the world. Not a fragment in a shard or a memory in an object. A person. In a body. He put down his fork. And when he's a person in a body, I can finish it. After you die briefly, Johnny said. After I die briefly, Harry confirmed. Johnny looked at him across the kitchen table for a long moment. The evening light came through the farmhouse windows and lay warm on the stone floor and the old wooden table and the two of them facing each other across the meal that Harry had made, and the moor was beautiful outside, and the road had brought them here from Godric's Hollow in 1981 by a route that was never straight and never safe and had always been forward. I need you to know something, Johnny said. Harry waited. I was afraid, Johnny said. When I found you. I was terrified. Not of the writer, not of Voldemort, not of the work, I was terrified of being responsible for a child when I had no idea how to do that. He looked at his coffee cup. I made 100 mistakes, probably. I know I did. There were things you needed that I didn't know how to give and things I gave you that nobody asked for. He paused. But I need you to know that none of it, not one day of it, was anything other than the most important thing I've ever done. Harry looked at him. He felt the weight of this land where it was meant to land, in the place that 12 years of being this man's kid had built specifically to receive this kind of weight. "I know," he said. "Yeah," Johnny said. "You're going to be at the boundary," Harry said. "This year. Whatever happens. Every day," Johnny said. "And when I come back through the door, I'll be there," Johnny said. Absolute. Immovable. The writer in him and the man in him both pointed in the same direction without contradiction. "Then we're fine," Harry said. The Triwizard Tournament moved the way Johnny had predicted, a long elaborate machine building toward the moment when it would serve Voldemort's purpose rather than its own stated one. Harry watched it move. He watched Barty Crouch Jr. wearing Mad-Eye Moody's face. He'd felt it on the first day of term, that same inhabited wrongness he'd felt from Quirrell, though differently configured, more practiced, more intact, and let the performance run because the performance was the mechanism and the mechanism needed to complete its function for the plan to reach its natural ending. He told Dumbledore in October. Dumbledore had listened, asked 3 clarifying questions, and made 2 adjustments to the tournament's underlying structure that would not be visible to Crouch but would limit certain of his options. Then he had looked at Harry with those blue eyes doing their complex work and said, "You're letting it run." "Yes," Harry said. "Because the ending of the run is the confrontation." "Yes." "And you're ready for the confrontation." "Yes." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I spent years building a plan around the idea that you needed to be kept ignorant of certain facts," he said. "That knowledge would be burdensome. That you'd carry it badly." He looked at Harry with something that was genuinely close to rueful. "I was wrong about that so comprehensively that I find myself wondering what else I've been wrong about." "Most people are wrong about what other people can carry," Harry said. "People are usually stronger than you think. You just have to tell them the truth and let them decide what to do with it." "Your father's philosophy," Dumbledore said. "Mine too," Harry said. The third task of the tournament was the maze, and in the maze was the port key, and the port key was the mechanism. Harry reached the cup and held it in his hands and felt the enchantment in it, not with his wand, with the fire, with the writer-adjacent sense that had been reading enchantments since he was old enough to notice things were enchanted, and felt it pulling toward a single fixed point, a graveyard, awaiting. He looked at the cup. He looked at Cedric Diggory, who had reached the cup at the same moment from the other direction, flushed with the effort of the maze and holding his wand with the unconscious competence of someone who was genuinely excellent at this, who deserved to be standing here holding this cup in a context that was actually what it claimed to be. "It's a port key," Harry said. Cedric blinked. "What?" "The cup," Harry said. "It's a port key. It's going to take whoever holds it to a graveyard where someone intends to use them as part of a resurrection ritual for Voldemort." He held Cedric's eyes. "You need to step back." Cedric looked at the cup. He looked at Harry. He was not an unintelligent person, he was careful and observant, and he had been watching Harry all year with the specific attention of someone trying to understand a person rather than a reputation. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." "You've known." "Since October," Harry said. Cedric was quiet for a moment. "And you've been letting it run," he said. "Yes." Because the ending had to come," Harry said. "Because the only way to finish this properly is to meet it at the ending point, not to keep chasing it sideways." He looked at Cedric steadily. "I've been ready for this for 2 years. Let me do what I came here to do." Cedric looked at him for a long moment, the look of someone adding up a person and finding the total consistent, and stepped back. "Come back," he said. "As a statement. As a demand." "That's the plan," Harry said. He took the cup. The graveyard was dark and cold, the air thick with the specific atmosphere of a place that had been prepared for something, the way the air in a room feels different when furniture has been rearranged. The yew tree was there. The headstone, Tom Riddle, was there. The dark-robed figure with the bundle was there, and the bundle moved, and the voice that came from it was thin and cold and old and furious and had been building toward this moment for 14 years. Harry stunned Wormtail before the man's wand was fully out, because there was no tactical reason to allow additional complications. Wormtail went down, and the bundle hit the ground, and what was in the bundle writhed and hissed, and the voice that came from it said, with an intensity that was pure concentrated will, "You cannot stop this." "I know," Harry said. He was standing in the graveyard with his wand in his hand and the portkey cup 3 feet behind him and the stars overhead cold and distant and the rider's boundary somewhere in Wales, beyond what he could feel, and he thought, this is where the road ends. And starts. "I'm not here to stop it," Harry said. "I'm here to let it happen." Silence from the bundle on the ground. "The ritual needs my blood," Harry said. "You need your body back. You need to be a fixed point, a person, something that can be properly finished. I understand why." He crouched down. "And I'm telling you that I'll let the ritual happen. Because it doesn't matter what you reconstitute yourself into. Because the last anchor is here." He touched his scar. "And when the last anchor goes, you go with it. Whatever body you're in." What was in the bundle was very still. The cold intelligence that had survived 12 years of half-existence focused on him with an absolute precision. "You would allow your own blood to be used against you," it said. "I'm using my blood for me," Harry said. "The ritual kills the shard. The shard's death is your end. Your resurrection is the mechanism for your destruction. That's the poetry of it. You will die." "Briefly," Harry said. A long pause. And in the pause was something that was not what Harry expected, not fury, not contempt. Something that recognized the truth of a statement about itself, and found the truth intolerable, and had no mechanism for denying it. "You're not afraid," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said. "My whole architecture," Voldemort said, very quietly, "was built to make you afraid." "I know," Harry said. "It didn't work because I was raised by someone who taught me what things were worth being afraid of. And there's nothing here worth being afraid of. Not you. Not dying briefly. Not the door." He paused. "You built an entire life around not going through the door. What did it cost you?" Silence. "Everything you could have been," Harry said. "That's what it cost." He stood up. He looked at the graveyard around them, the cold stars, the dark earth, and he thought about his parents in a house that was rubble now, and he thought about Johnny on a motorcycle riding across the sky, and he thought about Ron and Hermione in a castle 300 miles north, and he thought about the Weasleys and Lupin and Sirius and Neville and Cedric waiting at the maze's edge, and he felt all of it, the full weight of everything the world contained that was worth going through a door. 4. "Wormtail," he said. "Wake up." The stunner wore off and Wormtail came back to consciousness with the gasping urgency of someone whose body was operating ahead of their mind, and Harry looked at him and said, "Complete the ritual." Wormtail stared at him. "Complete it," Harry said. "That's what you came here to do. Do it." The ritual took 20 minutes and it hurt, the bone and blood and flesh components of it, the knife and the cauldron and the dark magic that had been composed specifically for this moment. Harry endured it with the stillness of someone who has decided that a thing is necessary and decided all the way, not partially, the way you held still for a necessary medical procedure, because the flinching doesn't reduce the necessity and makes everything longer. The cauldron boiled. And from it rose Tom Marvolo Riddle, Lord Voldemort, in a body that was new and wrong and blazing with the specific terrible energy of something that had been restored to physical form after years of formlessness. Tall. White. Red-eyed. The face that had given itself over to the construction of a persona so completely that the original person was only visible in the architecture of the bones, the intelligence behind the eyes. He stood in the graveyard and felt himself, and the feeling of himself after years without a body moved across his face in something that was almost human before it became something else. He turned to Harry. "And now," Voldemort said, with the voice fully restored, resonant, designed to carry weight, "we finish it." "Yes," Harry said. "We do." What happened in the graveyard lasted 11 minutes by any external measure and approximately a lifetime by the measure of what it contained. Voldemort's magic was extraordinary, pure, deep, refined by 50 years of study and 30 years of obsessive singular focus. His spells were beautiful in the way that very terrible things were sometimes beautiful, the way lightning was beautiful. Harry met them with his own fire, not the writer's, not borrowed, entirely his own, and the fire that was in him was the fire of 3 people layered together, James and Lily and Harry, and it had been building for 13 years and it knew exactly what it was for. The killing curse came twice. Harry moved through both of them without shield, without deflection, with the specific calm of someone who has decided that they are not afraid of a word. The third time Voldemort cast it, Harry let it land. The door opened. It was not dark. That was the first thing. Not dark and not light, something else, a quality of space that was neither, a place that existed in the architecture of transition. The second thing was the absence of the shard. He felt it go the moment the curse landed, felt the piece of Voldemort in his forehead die the way the others had died, that below sound frequency, the soul unmade, and what replaced it was not absence but space. Room. His own head, entirely his for the first time in his conscious existence. The third thing was the door. It was exactly what the writer had shown Johnny in the workshop in the dark, a door, substantial and ordinary-looking and absolutely clearly something that went both ways. Harry stood in the non-dark non-light and looked at the door, and felt the tether, his mother's tether, the permanent thing, the intent behind the sacrifice, warm and specific and unmistakable as a hand on your shoulder. He turned around. He walked back through the door. The graveyard again. The cold and the stars. His body, which was lying on the grass near the headstone of Tom Riddle Sr., and which was himself, and which resumed being occupied in the specific abrupt way of things returning to their natural state. He sat up. His chest ached where the curse had hit. His scar was completely silent for the first time in his life, no burn, no presence, no fragment. Clean. Across the graveyard, Voldemort was on his knees. He'd felt it. Harry understood that immediately, had felt the last anchor die, had felt the shard go, and the feeling of it had moved through him like the ground disappearing from under his feet. He was still in his body, still in the restored physical form, but what had been holding him to existence beyond normal death, what had made him Lord Voldemort rather than Tom Riddle dying of his own reflected curse, was gone. And he knew it. He looked at Harry sitting up in the graveyard grass, and his red eyes were doing something that Harry had seen once before, briefly, in the room of requirement, that recognition of a true statement about the self, intolerable and undefiable. "It's done," Harry said. Voldemort looked at him. His face was doing something complicated. The constructed face, the persona, the Lord, all of it was still there in the physical architecture, but something behind it was different now. Smaller. More honest. Not because Harry had made it honest, but because the thing that had been doing the lying was gone, and what was left was Tom Riddle, 68 years old and brilliant and alone in a graveyard, in a body he'd made for himself, with nothing left to hold on to. "You could have lived," Harry said. "Actually lived. You were 16 and extraordinary and you had everything in front of you." "I was nobody," Voldemort said. His voice had lost something, the resonance, the weight. He sounded, for the first time, like a person rather than a performance. "A half-blood orphan, so am I," Harry said. "That's the only thing we have in common, and look at what we did differently with it." Voldemort was quiet. He was looking at his own hands, the new hands, white and thin, and Harry watched him look at them and understood what he was seeing, the sum of every choice, visible in the form he'd constructed for himself, everything he'd become in the course of becoming unkillable. "It didn't work," Voldemort said. Not addressing Harry. Addressing himself. The flat factual acknowledgement of a lifetime's equation not balancing. "No," Harry said. Harry raised his wand and spoke the disarming charm, not the killing curse, not fire, not anything dramatic. Expelliarmus. Clean, simple, the first proper spell he'd ever been taught. Voldemort's wand flew 20 feet and landed in the graveyard grass, and Tom Riddle sat on his knees in the cold with nothing left to hold, and for a moment, just a moment, his face was the face of someone very young and very lost. Then it was still. Harry stood over Tom Riddle's body for a long moment. He felt the graveyard around him, the cold stars above, the settled silence of a thing that had been in motion for 30 years finally coming to rest. He felt the absence of the shard in his own head, the new clean space of it. He felt the tether in his chest, his mother's permanent gift, warm and present. He picked up the portkey cup. He went home. The boundary was at the edge of Hogwarts grounds, and Johnny was there. Harry saw him from the air as the portkey carried him in, the figure on the motorcycle at the perimeter of the ward line, the bike's engine running, the headlights on in the dark. He'd been there all night. He'd been there every night of the tournament, probably. He'd been there every day for 3 years, at varying distances, at various boundaries, every wall and ward that Harry had gone through and Johnny had had to stop at. Harry came down on the grounds and walked to the boundary, and Johnny crossed to him, and they stood at the ward line in the dark. Harry said nothing. He touched the scar on his forehead, the lightning bolt shape, still there, still visible, but quiet now, just a scar, just a mark that said something happened here once. He pressed his fingers to it and looked at Johnny and let the silence carry what the silence could carry. Johnny looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached across the ward line. The wards didn't react, they recognized what he was and held their boundary without hostility, just definition, and put his hand briefly on Harry's head the way he'd put his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder in Godric's Hollow 14 years ago, when Harry had been 15 months old and crying in a ruined nursery and hadn't known yet what kind of life was about to begin. "Done," Johnny said. "Done," Harry said. Johnny nodded once. He stepped back. The rider was visible at the edges of him, that ambient fire, that sense of something ancient and absolute and satisfied. The work was finished. The last hook in the world's fabric was gone. Death had been returned to its natural order, the door was closed, and the road was clear. "Get inside," Johnny said. "Pomfrey's going to be furious." "She is," Harry agreed. "I'll be at King's Cross for Christmas." "Right platform this time," Harry said. "Always the same joke," Johnny said. "It's a good joke," Harry said. He walked back toward the castle, the grounds cold and dark around him, the lights of Hogwarts above him on the hill, warm and old and permanent. He felt the castle's awareness, that distributed ancient magic, settle around him as he walked, the way it always settled, recognizing him, familiar. The ward line was behind him. The motorcycle's engine sound faded as he moved uphill. At the castle door, he stopped and looked back. The headlights were still on, at the boundary. Visible from here. He stood and looked at them for a moment, that fixed point of light in the dark outside the wards, patient and present, exactly where it was supposed to be. He went inside. The door closed behind him, warm and solid, and the fire in the torches turned its steady gold, and somewhere in the castle his friends were sleeping, and somewhere in the grounds Dumbledore was waiting with questions, and somewhere in Britain Sirius was free and Lupin was teaching and Peter Pettigrew was in a cell, and somewhere in Albania a graveyard contained what was left of Tom Riddle, and the scar on Harry's forehead was clean and quiet and his own. He walked up the stairs into the castle's warmth, forward, always forward, and the road behind him stretched all the way back to a ruined house and a cold night and a man on a motorcycle and a baby who had grabbed a finger and held on. The fire burned steady. The road was clear.